Welcome to the world of the Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien's timeless epic that has captivated millions for generations. You can find the full audiobook version in the description. Please feel free to check it out. In this series, we'll journey through the entire trilogy, exploring all 6 books chapter by chapter, uncovering the depth, beauty, and adventure of Middle-earth. From the peaceful Shire to the fiery depths of Mount Doom, we'll follow Frodo Baggins, the Fellowship, and a host of unforgettable characters as they navigate a tale of courage, friendship, and the fight against overwhelming darkness. This is more than just a summary. It's a gateway into Tolkien's masterpiece, highlighting key moments, analyzing the story's themes, and bringing to life the magic of Middle-earth. So, prepare yourself for an epic adventure. The road goes ever on. Let us begin. Book 1. The Fellowship of the Ring. Chapter 1. A long-expected party. Okay, settle in, and let me tell you the tale of Bilbo Baggins's grandest party. A party so magnificent it shook the very foundations of the Shire. It all began when Mr. Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit of peculiar wealth and even more peculiar habits, announced he was turning 11. That's 111, a grand age for a hobbit. Now, Bilbo had always been a bit of a legend in hobbiting. 60 years before, he'd vanished on an adventure, returning with tales of riches and wonder, leading to rumors of tunnels under his hill, brimming with treasure. On top of that, time seemed to have forgotten him. At 99, he looked no older than 50. Some whispered it wasn't natural, that trouble was sure to follow, but for the most part, folks were happy enough to enjoy his generosity, even if he was a little odd. He had no real friends, not until young Frodo Baggins, his favorite cousin, came to live with him at Bag End as his heir. Bilbo and Frodo shared a birthday, September 22nd, and their parties together were a highlight of every year, but this year was special. Not only was Bilbo turning 11, a truly remarkable hobbit age, but Frodo would also be coming of age, hitting the ripe old age of 33. The whole Shire began to buzz. Old stories of Bilbo's past resurfaced, and the local gardener, Old Ham Gamgee, regaled anyone who would listen with tales of Mr. Baggins. Of course, there were plenty of gossiping whispers about Frodo being a brandybuck on his mother's side. Those strange river folk from beyond the Brandywine River who had a taste for boats, a thing hobbits found quite unnatural, and a tale of Frodo's parents being drowned. As the date drew closer, odd things began to arrive at Bag End. A cart driven by dwarves with mysterious packages, and a wagon pulled by an old man with a pointed blue hat. None other than the legendary wizard Gandalf, known for his spectacular fireworks displays. Hobbits had long since forgotten a spectacle like that, and excitement soared. The day of the party finally dawned, a beautiful Thursday in September. It wasn't just a party, it was a festival. Everyone from the neighborhood and far beyond were invited. Bilbo himself greeted each guest, handing out extravagant presents, some even of magical dwarf make. There was food galore, music, dancing, and all sorts of merriment all day long. But the peak of the day was Gandalf's fireworks show. Rockets burst into life, taking the form of birds, trees, ships, and even a huge dragon that roared and flew over the crowd, causing gasps of wonder and perhaps a little fright. After the fireworks, the real feast began. A family dinner with 144 invited guests in a grand pavilion under a tree with lanterns hanging from the branches. Bilbo, however, was known to include some of his poetry in his speeches, and many of the guests were not keen to hear it. However, when he got up to speak, he began well enough, praising them all and saying how much he enjoyed living among such fine folk. Then, with a flash and a bang, Bilbo made an announcement. This was the end. He was leaving now. And with that, he stepped down from the chair and vanished. Gone! Just like that. Hobbits were shocked, confused, and more than a little annoyed. They thought it was a silly prank, but old Rory Brandybuck suspected it was something more. Frodo, who was in on the joke, secretly watched on as the guests ate and drank, but realized he was going to miss his cousin. As the party wound down, The guests gradually departed, and Frodo went on to claim the items that had been left to him, and after finding them, he was also left with the golden ring. Inside Bag End, Bilbo had a final, tense conversation with Gandalf. He admitted he had grown attached to the ring, a ring he'd kept secret for years. Gandalf, sensing a darker power, insisted Bilbo leave it behind for Frodo. Bilbo, reluctant, even agitated by the thought, finally agreed, though not easily. He then bid Gandalf a last goodbye, and with a spring in his step, and with 3 dwarves at his side, and with a song on his lips, Bilbo vanished into the night, leaving the Shire behind. Later that evening, Gandalf told Frodo to take care of the ring, but refused to keep it. Before leaving, he told Frodo that he would be keeping a close eye on him. The night finally drew to a close, but in the morning, the Shire had a new and greater mystery. The next day, Frodo was left to hand out all the many gifts Bilbo had so thoughtfully prepared. While Frodo had a trying time with the guests, including the bitter Sackville Bagginses, who were furious at being left nothing but some spoons, he managed to clear the house. When it was all done, he was surprised by a soft knock at the door. When he answered it, Gandalf returned, more worried than before. He warned Frodo about the ring, that there was something mysterious about it, that he should use it seldom or not at all, and to keep it a secret. Gandalf then left again, promising to return when the time was right. Thus ended the grandest party, leaving the Shire buzzing with gossip and wonder, and Frodo holding a great responsibility and a ring with powers unknown. And so, the stage was set for the adventure to come. Chapter 2: The Shadow of the Past. The departure of Bilbo Baggins was the talk of the Shire for a year and a day, and long afterward. Stories of his vanishing and reappearing act with treasure evolved over time into legendary tales of Mad Baggins for young hobbits. The general consensus, however, was that Bilbo had finally gone off the deep end, probably meeting a tragic end somewhere in the blue. Gandalf got most of the blame for his influence on Bilbo. Despite what the Shire thought, Gandalf left young Frodo alone, which to everyone's surprise, did nothing to diminish the oddity of his behavior. Frodo, unconcerned about the general opinions, threw an annual party to honor Bilbo's birthday. It started as a 100-weight feast, but morphed into an annual celebration. When questioned about Bilbo's whereabouts, Frodo simply shrugged and proclaimed Bilbo wasn't dead. He lived at Bag End much as Bilbo had, though he had many friends, particularly younger hobbits like Pippin Took and Merry Brandybuck, descendants of the old Took. He often wandered with them, and sometimes he would wander alone under the starlight, much to the bewilderment of his fellow hobbits. As the years passed, Frodo, like Bilbo, showed uncanny signs of preservation, looking robust and energetic, even well past his tweens. Some whispered it was luck, while others grew wary. As he approached 50, the age at which Bilbo's adventure began, Frodo began to feel restless. He would stare at maps, wondering what lay beyond the edges of the Shire, talk to strangers on the road, and watch the strange procession of elves and dwarves that began to pass through the Shire. Rumors of trouble brewing beyond their borders reached the ears of even the most homebound hobbit. They spoke of the enemy in the land of Mordor, old names from the dark past. It seemed the evil in Mirkwood had returned to the Black Tower of Mordor. Orcs were multiplying. Trolls had grown cunning, and there were hints of creatures even more terrible. Even in the cozy green dragon inn in Bywater, whispers circulated about these strange happenings. Sam Gamgee, now a grown man but as keen as ever, shared tales with Ted Sandyman and other hobbits. Sam, always a believer in the old stories, spoke of seeing elves and tree-men, and the westward migration of the elves to the Grey Havens. Ted, a more pragmatic hobbit, scoffed at the tales. As the evening drew to a close, Sam left the inn for Bag End, and it was here, as twilight was fading, that the familiar tap at the study window brought Gandalf back to Frodo. Frodo welcomed his old friend, but the joy was tempered by the shadow of Gandalf's news. The wizard revealed the true danger of the ring, not just a trinket, but a ring of power. It would corrupt anyone who possessed it, turning them into a wraith of their former self. He explained that there were lesser rings made by the elves and the great rings of power, which were made by Sauron in the ancient times, and that each ring was perilous to mortals. Gandalf revealed that Bilbo's prolonged life was linked to the ring, and that he had been trying to put his claim to the ring beyond doubt. He then confirmed that the ring was, in fact, the One Ring, the Master Ring of Sauron, and he was greatly weakened for having lost it. Gandalf revealed he had spent his years learning of the rings, of Gollum's involvement, and he was convinced of the ring's evil influence. To prove his point, Gandalf threw the ring into the fire, and there the elvish letters, written in the language of Mordor, appeared. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all and in the darkness bind them. Gandalf revealed that Sauron was seeking it, that it was his greatest hope and their greatest fear. He explained the history of the rings, the elven kings and the dwarf lords, the mortal men, and finally, the One Ring in Sauron. It was Gil-galad and Elendil who overthrew Sauron, and Isildur cut the ring from his hand. Isildur then lost the ring in the Great River, where it lay undiscovered for many centuries. Gandalf continued with the story of how the ring was found by Smeagol and the corruption that it brought upon him, and how that led to his transformation into Gollum. He explained that Gollum's murder of Dégol, as well as his theft of the ring, made him hateful and miserable, and that after being cast out of his home and family, he fled to the mountains. Gandalf then told of how Gollum eventually lost the ring to Bilbo, how it was his longing that drew him out of the mountains, and how he was eventually captured, and then escaped. Frodo was shocked to learn that Gollum was the same creature that Bilbo had spoken of, and that he had tracked them and learned of the Shire and of Bilbo's home. Frodo was terrified and asked how he came to have such a terrible thing. Gandalf replied that the ring was trying to get back to its master, but that there was a higher purpose, that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and that Frodo was meant to have it. Gandalf said he was not guessing. He knew these things to be true and that he had even seen Gollum. He asked about Bilbo's time with Gollum, and was told he lied about it being a birthday present, and that he meant to cheat Bilbo, but also that Bilbo had a kindness to him. He then said that he knew where he came from and his name, and this led Gollum out into the world. Gandalf then told of how he and Aragorn tracked Gollum through Wildlin to Mordor, where he was captured. The knowledge that Gollum had been in Mordor confirmed his fears. Sauron now knew about the ring, and he was most likely looking for the Shire. Frodo was despairing. He asked what he was to do. He wished Bilbo had killed Gollum, and that he hadn't found the ring. Gandalf said that it was a pity that stayed Bilbo's hand, and that his kindness had been the reason for his safe escape. He told Frodo that he would need to keep the ring, and that he would have a hand in the final fate of it, and that he was chosen for a reason, not for power, but because he had the strength of heart and wits to bear it. Frodo then asked Gandalf to take it, but Gandalf refused. He knew he would not be able to resist the temptation of using it, which would make him no different than the Dark Lord himself. Gandalf then told Frodo that he must go. He needed to leave the Shire, and he would go under the name of Underhill. He would need a companion, and he should be careful of what he says to even his closest friends. At that moment, Gandalf sent someone nearby and caught Sam Gamgee listening outside the window. Sam, upon his capture, confessed his love of stories, and that he was deeply upset over Frodo's impending departure. Gandalf, instead of punishing Sam, declared that he would go along with Frodo, and before Sam could even process what he had heard, he burst into tears and was overwhelmed with joy. Chapter 3:3 is company. Time continued to pass as Frodo prepared for his departure, but still, he hadn't set off. Gandalf, growing anxious, emphasized that he must leave quietly and soon, but Frodo was torn. He wanted to enjoy his last summer in the Shire and slip away without causing alarm, a difficult task for any hobbit. He settled on leaving on his 50th birthday, Bilbo's 128th. That felt like the right time to embark on a journey in his footsteps. He said he had no idea where he was to go, that he was going to lose something, instead of finding it like Bilbo, and that he was most likely not to return. Gandalf responded that he could not see very far, and that Frodo was not ready for that long road yet, and that the most important thing was for him to go towards the danger, not too rashly and not too straight, and he needed to make for Rivendell. Frodo agreed, saying he would take Sam with him to visit the elves. Then, one summer evening, the news broke out. Frodo was selling Bag End to the Sackville Bagginses. A rumor sprang up, supported by Frodo himself, that he was moving to Buckland to live among his relatives. It was a clever disguise, and it gave Frodo a reasonable explanation for moving to the edge of the Shire. Gandalf remained in the Shire for another 2 months, and at the end of June, he suddenly announced he was leaving again to search for news south of the Shire. He seemed worried but told Frodo to stick to his plan, but to be careful, and above all, not to use the ring. He promised to return for the farewell party, but may need to accompany Frodo on the road. Frodo was disturbed but in the fine weather. He soon forgot his worries. Autumn arrived, and Frodo began to get anxious about Gandalf, who had neither appeared nor sent word. On the 20th of September, his furniture was sent ahead to Crickhollow, his new home in Buckland, and the next day, Frodo was more worried than before, but he continued with his plans. On his birthday, he had a small farewell dinner with his friends, and after toasting Bilbo, they went to bed. The next day, Merry and Fatty departed with the last of the luggage, while Pippin remained behind. Frodo, restless and anxious, decided to start his journey that evening. He planned to walk to Bucklebury Ferry. After lunch, Lobelia and her son showed up to take possession of Bag End, further irritating Frodo. She did a thorough inventory of the home and departed with most of the keys, leaving one with the Gamgees. Frodo, Pippin, and Sam had their final meal together in the kitchen. Sam was officially tasked with looking after Frodo's garden, and with that they packed and prepared to depart. As they set out, Frodo waved farewell to Bag End, and they slipped into the darkness, taking a path through the meadows at the foot of the hill. After a short walk, they reached a gate leading into a narrow lane where Sam met them. They traveled along hedges and woods until they reached a narrow bridge, and after crossing, they left the main road. After walking for about 3 hours, they stopped to rest, where they ate a frugal supper. Then they continued, arriving at a narrow road that led to Woodhall and Stock, and then onward to the Bucklebury Ferry. They went on for some time before Pippin, growing weary, asked to rest, so they went into a nearby fir wood and set up a camp. They set no watch, for they believed they were safe in the heart of the Shire. In the morning, they ate a small breakfast and set off again. They walked, and after some time, they reached the edge of the Shire, where the road went downward towards the Brandywine River. They stopped and looked east and began to talk about Bilbo's favorite phrase, the road. And Frodo began to recite a poem that Bilbo often said, which spoke of the road and how it leads to adventure and the unknown. When they resumed their trek, Sam heard the sound of a horse approaching from behind, and suddenly, Frodo felt a desire to hide. They went to the side of the road and watched as a black horse with a cloaked rider went by. The rider stopped, sniffing the air before continuing onward, seeming to turn off into the trees to the side of the road. Frodo was disturbed. He knew that he had been seen, but he wasn't sure what was going on. He felt that he must have had some special quality for the rider to have been looking for him, and was worried about what it all meant. When he rejoined Pippin and Sam, they talked about the rider, and Sam revealed that he had heard from his father, the gaffer, that a similar black-clad stranger had asked for Mr. Baggins at Bag End the previous evening, and that it was this man who had sent him off to Bucklebury. Frodo was worried, and they agreed to move on, not by the road, but alongside it, hidden from view. They walked for a long time, and by twilight, they reached a large hollow tree, where they stopped for a rest and a meal. As they resumed their journey, they began to hum a song as they walked. The song, made by Bilbo, spoke of adventure, but also of home and bed. They walked on until they heard the sound of hoofs once again. They dove into the trees to hide, while Frodo stayed near to the path. Once again, a black rider appeared, but this time it stopped and sniffed the air as if searching for something. Frodo felt a desire to slip on the ring, and as he reached for it, a sound of singing and laughter rang out. The rider quickly retreated, and suddenly a group of elves appeared. The elves, recognizing Frodo, asked him what he was doing out so late. Frodo was amazed at their presence in the Shire. Pippin, curious, asked them about the Black Riders, which seemed to concern them. Gilder, their leader, invited the hobbits to join them for the night, an offer that was gratefully accepted. The elves led them off the road and up into the hills, to a wide space of grass surrounded by trees. There, the elves lit a fire and invited the hobbits to join them. They spoke, sang, and ate as they sat beneath the stars. Frodo listened to them speak, asking them about the world beyond the Shire. He learned of darkness and wars and the flight of the elves. Finally, he asked Gilder if he had ever seen Bilbo since he departed. Gilder said that he had seen him twice, once in that very place, but he wouldn't say anything more about Bilbo. Gilder then revealed that he knew Frodo's departure was a secret. Gilder warned that peril lay before and behind him, and asked if Gandalf had told him anything of the Black Riders. Frodo said that he knew nothing, and Gilder refused to say more, for fear it would stop Frodo from his journey. He told Frodo that he must move quickly, that the Shire could no longer protect him. Frodo responded that he had hoped to simply walk to the river in peace, and Gilder replied that the Shire was not his to own, and that others would dwell there when the hobbits were gone. Frodo asked what he should do. Gilder said that he should still make his way to Rivendell, and that he should ask Gandalf for advice. Gilder said that he did not like it that Gandalf was late, and told him that he should go at once. He also told Frodo to not go alone, but that he should take trusty companions with him. Frodo then pressed him again for information about the Black Riders, but Gilder again refused to tell him. Instead, he said that he feared Frodo would come to know more of them than he ever would. Gilder then spoke of courage and told Frodo to sleep. The elves would be gone in the morning, but that they would send messages to others who may be able to help. After speaking for a long time, sleep finally came over Frodo, and he was led to a bower and fell into a dreamless sleep. Chapter 4, A Short Cut to Mushrooms. In the morning, Frodo awoke in his fragrant bower, and after a simple breakfast with Sam and Pippin, he declared they would make haste to Buckleberry Ferry. They would cut straight across the country from there, rather than following the road. Pippin tried to warn Frodo of the dangers of their route, but Frodo refused to hear it, saying it would be far less likely that they would encounter the Black Riders if they did not take the road. The memory of Bilbo's stories of walking the road and his words, "It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door," were weighing heavily on his mind, and he desperately wanted to avoid that perilous path. Frodo also considered asking Sam to stay behind, as he felt he shouldn't bring him into such danger. But when he spoke to Sam about it, Sam responded that he would not leave him, and that he was determined to see things through to the end. Frodo accepted this, realizing Gandalf had picked him a good companion. They set off, cutting through a thicket, and quickly found it to be more challenging than it appeared. As they struggled through the undergrowth, Sam caught sight of a black figure on a horse, standing high above them on the bank. They decided not to go back, and plunged on through the thicket. They soon reached the banks of the Stockbrook, and after crossing the stream, they continued on until they reached a large oak where it began to rain. They continued to trudge through the wood, and after some time, they stopped for lunch under a large elm tree. They ate and drank the elven food and drink, and began to laugh at their fears. Then, in the middle of their merriment, a long drawn-out wail, like the cry of some evil creature, came to their ears. It was answered by another, fainter cry, which sent chills down their spines. Frodo identified it as a call or a signal, and he knew that no hobbit had such a voice. After the interruption, they set off again and soon emerged from the wood. They realized they had turned too far to the south, and that the ferry was to their left. They cautiously crossed the open land before them, and came to a lane near a turnip field and a large gate. Pippin identified it as belonging to Farmer Maggot. Frodo, terrified, admitted that he had been avoiding that place for years, for he had been caught trespassing there after mushrooms when he was a child. He had been beaten and chased by the farmer's dogs. Pippin brushed aside Frodo's fears and walked onward. The gate opened and 3 ferocious dogs dashed out, ignoring Pippin and going for Sam and Frodo. The farmer appeared and demanded to know what they wanted. Pippin introduced himself, and after a moment, the farmer recognized him and then invited them inside. Frodo, still fearing the farmer, was anxious and nervous, but after hearing the farmer, it seemed he was to find himself in an awkward situation. Inside, Farmer Maggot began by asking them where they had been and where they were going. After he heard that they were heading to Buckleberry Ferry, he said that he had just been visited by a strange customer asking for Baggins. Farmer Maggot described him as a tall, black-clad figure who had asked about Bilbo Baggins and had said that Baggins has left. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. He had also offered the farmer gold for information, which he had refused. The farmer then asked Frodo to stay in Buckland and not get mixed up with such folk, as he knew that they were up to no good. Frodo said that they must be getting to the ferry, and thanked the farmer for his help. Farmer Maggot, seeing Frodo's distress, offered them supper, and then offered to drive them to the ferry by wagon, and the hobbits gratefully accepted. After a large and generous meal with the Maggot family, they set out in the dark, making their way slowly to the ferry along the Causeway Road. They were silent, as they strained to hear any sign of pursuit. Suddenly, ahead, they heard hoofs approaching. The hobbits jumped off the wagon and hid, while Sam stood beside the farmer. As the rider drew near, Farmer Maggot called out to them. The hoofs stopped, and in the mist, they heard a muffled voice ask, "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" Suddenly, a dark lantern was shown, and in the light, the farmer saw the face of Merry Brandybuck. Merry explained he had gone looking for them, worried about their absence. The hobbits were relieved, and Farmer Maggot, after hearing their stories, backed the wagon into the lane. He bid them good night. Then, before departing, he produced a basket of Mrs. Maggot's mushrooms. As the wagon faded into the darkness, Frodo, realizing the basket he had been given was full of mushrooms, laughed. Even when things seemed so terrible, the simple things of the Shire brought him comfort and a fleeting moment of laughter. Chapter 5, A Conspiracy, Unmasked. After the encounter with Merry and their escape from the Black Rider, the hobbits made their way to Crickhollow. It was a long and winding road to the isolated home, where they stepped out of the night and into the warm glow of its welcoming interior. It had been done up to look like a cozy hobbit hole, with many of Frodo's favorite things from Bag End. It seemed like a peaceful haven, and for a moment, Frodo yearned to simply settle there in comfortable retirement, and that he was wrong to have led his friends to such danger. But he knew he had to tell them of his true purpose, and that he had to leave them behind. However, it seemed his friends were waiting for just this moment. Merry and Fatty had prepared a delicious supper, and while the others were enjoying a bath, they set the table for a grand feast. After the meal, Merry said he wanted a full account of Frodo's adventures and asked him about Farmer Maggot, to which Frodo said that he wanted to be left in peace to think. Pippin then told Merry all about the Black Riders and their chase, and Frodo knew he could no longer keep his secret hidden. Merry revealed he knew Frodo was planning to leave the Shire and was planning to follow Bilbo. He then told Frodo that he knew about the ring, and that they were all in on the conspiracy, and that they weren't going to let him face the danger alone. Frodo, amazed, asked how he had learned so much. Merry explained that he had seen Bilbo vanish once, and then reappear, and that he had discovered his secret book. Pippin then declared that Sam was their chief investigator, as Sam was caught eavesdropping, but in doing so, he learned the truth about what was happening. Frodo was astonished and frustrated at being outmaneuvered by his friends, but he realized that he was deeply touched by their devotion, and finally agreed that they would all travel together. Merry and Pippin then burst into song. It was a new song, written to the tune of the dwarf song from Bilbo's Adventure. Then Frodo declared that they must now prepare to depart, and that they must begin first thing in the morning. They decided against waiting for Gandalf, as they were worried about the Black Riders, and decided to set off as soon as it was light, making their way into the old forest to escape the riders. Fredegar was horrified by this plan, for he knew the dangers of the forest, but Frodo was convinced it was their only chance of escape. They knew that the bridge would be watched, and that anyone who would ask for Mr. Baggins might be led directly to them. It was then decided that Fatty would remain at Crickhollow to keep up the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still there, and that he would be the one to inform Gandalf of what had happened. This also gave them the freedom to change directions without any further thought to the consequences. With the decision made, they set about finishing the preparations for their journey. They then went to bed, and Frodo had a restless sleep. He dreamt he was looking out from a high window over a dark sea of trees, and below he could hear the snuffling sounds of dark creatures. Suddenly, he found himself in the open and on a dark heap before a white tower, and he had a great desire to climb it. Then came a flash of light and the sound of thunder, and he awoke. Chapter 6: The Old Forest. At 4:30, Merry woke Frodo, and after a quick breakfast, the hobbits and Fatty Bolger set off into the early morning fog. They rode silently for some time, until they reached the tall netted hedge. Merry led them to a tunnel under the hedge, where they bid farewell to Fatty. As the gate was locked behind them, the sound was ominous, and the hobbits were now on the edge of the old forest. Merry described the forest as being strangely alive, and said the trees didn't like strangers, and that after dark, the trees whispered and moved and often surrounded strangers. He added that he had often been told of other strange creatures that lived deep in the forest, but he had never seen them. He did say, however, that there were paths in the wood, but that they seemed to shift and change from time to time. Merry declared that he knew of a path leading to the bonfire glade, and from there they should be able to reach their destination. As they entered, the trees were large, dark, and imposing, and there was an uneasy feeling of being watched. Pippin, becoming overwhelmed by it, suddenly shouted out in frustration, only to have his voice muffled by the forest. Merry warned him not to shout, as it was not wise, and that the trees seemed to resent it. They soon found the beginning of a path, but the trees seemed to constantly bar their way. At last, they came to the bonfire glade, a wide circular clearing where they could see the sky, which gave them much relief from the oppressive trees. However, as they went on, the air grew stuffy, the trees crowded in, and they were overwhelmed with a feeling of ill will. Frodo began to sing, but his voice faded, and a large branch fell nearby, which seemed to confirm that they had angered the forest. The path began to wind downwards, and soon the hobbits found themselves at the foot of a green hill, where they could see that the path continued onward. However, when they reached the top, they could see nothing that they were looking for, and they had lost all sense of direction. After eating lunch and peering over the edges of the forest, they decided to continue. But this time, they left the path and started going their own way, through the trees, into the heart of the woods. It soon became clear that they had become lost, and that they were being led deeper into the forest, until finally, they came to a steep ravine, which blocked their path, and they could only continue going downwards. Following the stream that ran down through the gully, they eventually came to an opening. They had reached the river with the Windle. They followed a path alongside the river as it turned eastward, hoping it would eventually lead them out of the forest. As the day wore on, the air became hot and stuffy, and the path became more difficult. The hobbits were overcome with drowsiness. They stopped by a large willow tree, and despite Frodo's attempts to resist it, they all fell asleep beneath its branches. Frodo suddenly awoke, and found that the great willow was reaching for him, and that a large root had twisted around him and pulled him down into the river, where he struggled to free himself. Sam, hearing his cries, pulled him from the water. After that, they heard a click, and discovered that Pippin had vanished, and Merry was being held tightly in a crack in the trunk. The hobbits were now frantic. They tried to free their friends from the tree, but to no avail. They attempted to burn the tree, but it only caused more pain. Frodo, desperate and witless, called out for help. Suddenly, an old man appeared out of the reeds with a large leaf filled with water lilies. He was Tom Bombadil, and he sang nonsense as he hopped and danced his way to the group. Tom was a strange sight to behold. He was big but not tall. He wore a blue coat and yellow boots, and a tall blue hat with a long feather. He had a long brown beard, and his face was bright red with 100 wrinkles. When Tom heard of the plight of the hobbits, he burst out laughing and said he knew just what to do. He called Old Man Willow to heel, and then sang into the cracks of the tree, which caused the bark to split open, releasing Pippin and Merry from its grasp. Tom invited the hobbits to his home, and they followed him along the path. They watched the sun sink into the trees behind them, and the light began to fade. Shadows fell, and the mist began to curl around them, creating strange and threatening shapes in the twilight. They felt as if they were in a dream. They finally reached Tom's house, which shone like a beacon from a gentle hillside. As they entered his home, they were met by the voices of Tom and Goldberry, his wife, who began a song about sun, moon, stars, and all the nature that surrounded them. The hobbits, now safe from the terrors of the old forest, were now in the home of a new and wondrous being, and another adventure was about to begin. Chapter 7 in the House of Tom Bombadil. The hobbits stepped into Tom Bombadil's house, blinking as they entered the long, low room that was lit by lamps and many yellow candles. A beautiful woman with long yellow hair, a green gown, and a belt of golden flag lilies sat in a chair facing the door. This was Goldberry, daughter of the river, whose voice they had heard singing. As she greeted them, she seemed to float over the lily bowls, a vision of beauty, and closed the door, shutting out the shadows of the night. They were enchanted by her grace and beauty, and Frodo, feeling a joy he did not understand, called her fair Lady Goldberry. She smiled and told them they were welcome, and that they would wait for the master of the house. She then told them that he was tending their tired beasts. Then Tom Bombadil entered. He was crowned with autumn leaves, and after taking Goldberry's hand, he invited the hobbits to join him in some refreshment. They were led to another room, where they were given water to bathe, and then they returned to join Tom and Goldberry at the table for a long and joyous feast. They ate as if they were starving, drank a water that tasted like wine, and they sang merrily together, their worries all forgotten. After the meal, Tom and Goldberry cleared the table and asked the hobbits to sit comfortably and listen as Tom began his tales. As he spoke, they were swept away by his stories of trees and flowers, good and evil, and the secrets hidden under brambles. As he spoke, they began to understand the lives of the forest and realized that they were the strangers and that everything else was at home. He told them of Old Man Willow and his evil ways, and then they heard of the great barrows and of the kings and queens that were buried there. He spoke of the Barrow Wights, who walked among the tombs with the clink of rings on their cold fingers. As he spoke, they lost all sense of time, and he then told tales of ancient starlight, when only the elf sires were awake. He then stopped and looked at them with his bright blue eyes. Frodo asked him who he was. Tom, still smiling, said, "That's the only answer. Tell me, who are you alone, yourself and nameless? But you are young, and I am old. Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn." Goldberry then arrived, and she told them it was time to rest, and they were then led away to their beds. There, after a moment, they fell asleep. Frodo had a fitful sleep, filled with images of a dark sea of trees, and then he dreamed of a stone tower on a tall ridge, and the sound of fell voices and wolves. He heard a mighty wind with a sound of galloping hoofs, and he thought it was the Black Riders. Pippin had a dream of being trapped inside the willow tree, with the sound of its creaking limbs, and he woke with a feeling of unease. Merry dreamed that the water was rising up all around him, threatening to drown him in his sleep. Sam, on the other hand, had a deep and content sleep. In the morning, they awoke at the sound of Tom's whistling, and they found him preparing for the day. After breakfast, the rain began to fall steadily, and Tom told them it was Goldberry's washing day. He then sat down with them by the fire, and began to tell them tales again, and his words brought all the stories of the forest to life. He spoke of evil things and good things, of pride, of rooted wisdom, and of malice. He told them of the great willow, his heart rotten, but his strength green. He then shifted to telling them of the great barrows and the kings and queens that were buried beneath the green mounds, and he told of how bones were stirred by barrow wights, and how stone rings grinned out of the ground like broken teeth. Then he told tales of regions far beyond their memory and beyond their waking thought. As he spoke, the light of the stars seemed to fill the sky. Frodo, overcome by his wonder, asked Tom who he was. Tom told him that he was eldest, that he had been there before the river and the trees, and that he remembered when the first raindrop fell. He also said that he knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside. A shadow passed by the window, and Goldberry appeared, and told them that the rain had ended, and it was time to laugh and be glad. She then left the hobbits with Tom, and he told them he would teach them the right road, and keep their feet from wandering. Tom then spun the ring in the air, and it vanished. He then handed it back to Frodo. Frodo, not sure what to make of that, waited for a moment, and then he slipped it on his finger. Merry turned to say something to him, but he had vanished. Frodo then, delighted, crept towards the door. Tom, however, could see him and called him back. They continued to talk for some time, and Tom said he believed the sun would shine tomorrow, and he advised them on how to get safely beyond the barrows, and he taught them a rhyme, to sing should they find themselves in danger. Then they were led back to bed, and there they slept again. They had lost all sense of time, their fears assuaged by the grace and hospitality of Tom and his wife, yet still they knew they had to move on. Chapter 8, Fog on the Barrow Downs. Frodo awoke refreshed, and after breakfast with Tom, they made ready to say farewell. As they prepared to leave, Frodo was distressed because they had not seen Goldberry that morning, but she appeared to them at the top of the hill, her hair glistening in the sun. She waved her arms and bid them to look around at the vast landscapes they were about to traverse. There, to the north, they could make out the faint line of trees where they knew they would find the east road. She bid them farewell, and they set off with the wind in their eyes. The hobbits made their way through the hills. The air was sweet and warm, and the land was silent except for the wind and the cries of strange birds. They reached a hill whose top was like a saucer, and they looked north, hoping to see the road, but instead they found it to be further than expected. To their east, the Barrow Downs rose up, crowned with green mounds and standing stones. Feeling uneasy at the sight, they rested at the center of the hollow, setting themselves against the cool stone at noon, in order to break their journey, little knowing what awaited them. After a while, they awoke to find themselves surrounded by a thick fog. The sun had vanished, and they were now enclosed in a cold and silent mist. They decided to move on, and made their way down the hill towards the north gate of the Barrow Downs. Frodo, hurrying ahead, found himself alone under two ominous standing stones. When he looked back, his friends were gone, and he called for them in distress. He heard distant cries, which lead him up a steep hill, and when he reached the top, he found himself alone on a round hill top where an icy wind blew. Suddenly, a dark figure loomed over him, and with a cold grip, he was dragged into darkness, and his memory faded. He awoke bound and on his back in the cold and dark, surrounded by Sam, Merry, and Pippin. He was in a barrow, imprisoned by a barrow wight. He could see that they were all dressed in white garments, with gold circlets and gold rings, and with a long, naked sword over their necks. He heard an incantation, a cold and dismal song of death and darkness. He watched as an arm crept out of the shadows to claim them, but he was overcome by a great surge of courage, and he fought back, using a sword that lay beside him, which was only effective in that single strike. As the sword shattered, he called out, remembering the rhyme that Tom Bombadil had taught them. Suddenly the ground shook, and Tom appeared, his bright blue eyes framed in the doorway. He banished the barrow wight and freed the hobbits, and took them out of the barrow and into the sunshine, where they could once again breathe fresh air. He then carried all the treasure from the barrow and laid it in the sun. He chose a brooch for Goldberry and a set of daggers for each of the hobbits, made by the men of Westerness. After eating a simple breakfast, the hobbits took to their ponies, and Tom rode alongside them on his pony Lumpkin. He sang nonsense songs as they traveled, and he led them to the place where the east road lay. He bid them farewell, telling them that they would find the prancing pony in Bree, where they could rest for the night and then set off again on the morrow. He then bid them farewell and rode away singing. The hobbits, filled with a deep sense of loss, watched as Tom rode away. They knew that they were going into lands they did not understand, and that they would need to be wary of the danger that was surely to come. With that, they rode off along the road into the gathering darkness, with the prancing pony in a warm bed as their only beacon. Chapter 9 At the Sign of the Prancing Pony. Bree was a small inhabited region, a village of both men and hobbits, and was known as the meeting place of all travelers. It had a long and storied history. The men of Bree were friendly and independent. The hobbits of Bree claimed to be the oldest settlement of their kind, founded long before the Shire. The two groups lived in harmony, and they had become an important crossroads for all folk. In the wildlands beyond Bree, there were the mysterious wanderers known as rangers, and their strange powers were spoken of in hushed tones. They were a tall, dark folk who traveled throughout Middle-earth, and they brought with them stories of faraway lands, and often stayed at the Prancing Pony Inn. The four hobbits reached Bree as night fell. When they arrived, they found the western gate closed, but after answering a few questions they were let in. As they rode through the gate, they could feel the suspicion of the gatekeeper, and could sense they were going to have to be careful. They drew up outside the inn, with its 3 stories, many windows, and the sign of a fat white pony on its hind legs. Inside, they could hear a lively song, and so they decided to enter. Frodo was greeted by the short, fat, and red-faced innkeeper, Barliman Butterbur, who was quite busy with his many guests. Mr. Butterbur was immediately distracted by the 4 hobbits, and after remembering that they were hobbits, he quickly snapped his fingers and called for one of his servants, Nob. They were given a comfortable room in the north wing of the inn and told that supper would be ready as soon as possible, and that they were welcome to join the company in the common room. After washing and putting away their packs, the hobbits joined the other guests. They found that the company was a mix of local hobbits, dwarves, men of Bree, and some other stranger folk. Frodo tried to use the pretense that they were seeking information for a book they were going to write, but he found himself mostly listening to the other guests talk, while his friends Pippin and Sam found themselves the center of attention. Frodo, uncomfortable, sat in a corner by a dark wall and was immediately aware of a strange-looking man who was watching them intently. When he asked Butterbur about him, Butterbur told him he was a ranger, that he was called Strider, and that he seldom spoke. Strider then waved to Frodo and beckoned him over, and told him that it was not safe for his young friends to be talking too freely, and then added that there had been even stranger travelers through Bree lately. As Frodo looked around, Pippin was telling a comic account of Bilbo's farewell party. Frodo grew more worried, realizing that their secret was about to be exposed. He worried that Pippin might mention the ring. Strider then whispered that he needed to do something fast. Frodo, desperately trying to distract them, jumped up onto a table and began to sing. The song was a ridiculous ditty about an inn that Bilbo had been fond of. At the end of the song, however, Frodo fell off the table with a bang and vanished. Frodo had accidentally put the ring on, and when he was realized that he had suddenly disappeared, the room was thrown into chaos. The Bree hobbits stared at them and muttered amongst themselves. The dwarves and strange men departed without a word, and Frodo felt like a fool. He removed the ring and crawled to Strider. Strider told him that he had put his finger in it, and that it was worse than anything his friends could have said. He then revealed he wanted to speak to Frodo in private. Mr. Butterbur, after cleaning up, came to ask Frodo about the incident and said that he did not like odd behavior, and he warned that they didn't take to that sort of thing. Frodo then said he was going to bed and asked that his ponies be ready early in the morning. He then found that Butterbur also wanted to speak to him privately, as something had come back to mind that he needed to share. Frodo, now full of anxiety and dread, felt as though they were surrounded by enemies, all in league against him. He wondered who was telling the truth and what was about to be revealed. He was about to have a very long night in Bree, and he knew it was going to be one filled with revelations. Chapter 10 Strider. Frodo, Pippin, and Sam returned to the parlor of the Prancing Pony to find that it was dark and that Merry was gone. As they rekindled the fire, Strider emerged from the shadows and sat down by the door, asking to speak privately with Frodo. Frodo, still suspicious, demanded to know more about Strider's business, and Strider, with a slow smile, said that he wanted a reward for his information, to go with them on their journey. Frodo, still unsure, refused, until Strider revealed that he knew their secrets. He had overheard them on the road west of Bree, and that he knew they were looking to hide their name, and that they were from the Shire. He then said that he had been searching for Frodo Baggins, because he knew he was carrying a secret of great importance. Frodo was disturbed and annoyed, but he had to admit he was also intrigued. Strider told him of the Black Horseman that had passed through Bree, and then added that some in Bree could not be trusted, especially Bill Ferny, and that he had seen him leaving with one of the southern men. Frodo asked Strider why they should trust him when he was being so mysterious. Strider, seeing their doubts, said that he could help them, and that he knew all the lands between the Shire and the Misty Mountains, and then he asked again if they would take him. Sam refused, saying that he trusted him even less now. But Frodo, remembering Gilder's words about taking those who were willing, felt a pull towards this man who seemed to know so much. Before they could continue their discussion, Mr. Butterbur came in to bring them warm water, and to tell them that he finally remembered his message from Gandalf, a message that was meant for Frodo. He gave them a letter from the wizard and explained that he had put it away for safety and had only just recalled it. The letter from Gandalf confirmed Strider's story and urged Frodo to go to Rivendell, and said they might find a friend along the way, who would be known as Strider and was called Aragorn. He said he was a good guide who knew their business, but they also needed to be careful, for there were many strange men on the roads. He also instructed Frodo not to use the ring, and that they must not travel by night. He then told them to go to Bree and stay at the Prancing Pony, where they would find Butterbur, a worthy and helpful man. Finally, he wrote a mysterious rhyme that seemed to apply to Strider. Frodo passed a letter to Sam and Pippin and asked Strider why he had not revealed his connection to Gandalf, and Strider answered by saying that he had to be sure of them first. He then revealed his true name, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Pippin laughed at the situation, but Sam eyed Strider dubiously, so Strider revealed a broken sword, and said he could have had them dead already if he had been an impostor. Frodo, seeing the sword and hearing the stories, was finally starting to trust this strange man, but he felt weary and worried. He asked if they could finally get some sleep. At that moment, Merry rushed in, out of breath and terrified, and told him that he had seen the Black Riders in Bree. They had slipped through the south gate and gone to Ferny's house. Strider said that the Black Breath had touched him, that they must have been looking for them. They decided that, since the riders were in Bree, they could no longer stay in their rooms. They barricaded themselves inside the parlor, piling up their luggage against the door. While Strider was gathering up supplies, Frodo gave Merry a brief account of the night, and after hearing about all that had happened, Merry felt a deep concern for them all. They laid their blankets out, and while Strider sat watch by the door, they all tried to fall asleep. But Frodo's mind was racing, and then he drifted into a troubling dream of the moon, the sea, and a man standing on a tower, who had a staff that flashed with light, and an eagle that bore him away. Pippin dreamed of being trapped in the willow tree again, and Merry of being drowned, and Sam slept soundly. They all awoke with the rising sun, and found Strider ready to depart. Strider then said, "And now I think it is time you went to bed and took what rest you can. We shall have a rough road tomorrow. Even if we are allowed to leave Bree unhindered, we can hardly hope now to leave it unnoticed. But I shall try to get lost as soon as possible. I know one or two ways out of Breeland other than the main road. If once we shake off the pursuit, I shall make for Weathertop. With that, the hobbits tried to settle in, and they were now surrounded by as much mystery as when they had entered the old forest. Chapter 11: A Knife in the Dark. As the hobbits prepared for sleep at the Prancing Pony, darkness fell upon Buckland. In the stillness of the night, Fatty Bolger, overcome with fear, peered out of the door of the house at Crickhollow. He saw shadows move and the gate open, and then quickly close. He was then overcome with terror, and fled from the house. The night deepened, and a group of black figures approached. They moved silently around the home, and then with a crash, they broke down the door. At that moment, the horn call of Buckland rang out through the night, and spread across the land. The black figures fled from the house, and after stealing the ponies from the stable, they rode off to the north, leaving Buckland to raise their defenses, and wondering what they were fleeing from. At Bree, Frodo was suddenly awakened in his sleep by a disturbance, but Strider assured him that all was safe. However, Frodo's dreams were still troubled. In the morning, they found the windows of their rooms had been broken, the beds were tossed, and the bolsters ripped. Strider said the rooms had been searched. He told them that they had to move on quickly, and told them he was going to try and acquire a horse to assist them, as their ponies had been taken. After some time, the hobbits learned that they had been robbed of their horses. There was only one available for purchase, a poor old animal that was owned by Bill Ferny. They set off into the countryside to the east, but they knew they were now being hunted. As they reached the hills to the east, they could see the outline of the Barrow Downs, rising up on the horizon. By nightfall, they had found a small stream where they made their camp. They were all aware of the approaching darkness, and began to feel fearful and uncertain. The next morning, they continued their journey. They came upon an old road, with walls on either side, and as they walked, they began to think of old tales and ancient kingdoms. Sam even remembered a fragment of a song from his youth, and he sang it aloud. As they trudged along, it began to get hotter, and they sought shelter and rest in a small grassy hollow. Then suddenly, they were aware that they were being watched, and then they saw dark figures on the road below. The hobbits grew afraid, knowing they were being followed. Strider warned them that the enemy was close, and that they needed to move quickly. They led their ponies up the steep hill to Weathertop. There they found a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head, as Strider had said. Strider examined some markings on a white stone, and believed that they were from Gandalf, and that they confirmed that he was here a few days before them. They settled in the hollow below the hill for a meal and a rest. But Frodo felt the weight of his responsibility like a heavy burden. He worried they could not possibly travel as far as they needed, with so little provisions and with the Black Riders chasing them. The group were startled when they were suddenly aware of the presence of something evil, and they were all immediately overcome by a feeling of dread. They saw 3 dark figures appear out of the fog, like black holes in the deep shadows. A chill ran down Frodo's spine, and he was almost compelled to put on the ring. He fought with the temptation, but at the last moment, he slipped the ring on his finger. He could now see the Black Riders, and their eyes, cold and merciless, as they rushed towards him. He cried out, "O Elbereth, Gilthanil," and swung at the feet of his attacker. He felt a pain like ice pierce his shoulder, and then he fell into unconsciousness, but not before he caught a glimpse of Strider jumping out of the darkness with a flaming brand in each hand, and finally, he dropped the ring from his finger. They were now on the run, and they were being hunted. They had been attacked and had barely escaped with their lives, and they had no idea how they were going to make it to Rivendell, for the enemy seemed to be all around them. They were truly lost, in more ways than one, and their adventure had only just begun. Chapter 12: Flight to the Ford. While the hobbits were at the Prancing Pony, Fatty Bolger, overcome by fear, was fleeing from Crickhollow. 3 Black Riders broke into his home, while the horn call of Buckland was sounded, to wake the people and warn them of the danger. The Black Riders, however, rode to the north gate and left Buckland behind, knowing that the ring was no longer there. Frodo awoke from a troubling dream at the inn, to find Strider watching him. Strider told them that they had been spied upon, and that he needed to learn what their enemies were up to, He also said that he could feel that they were close by. In the morning, the hobbits found that all the ponies were gone, and they realized they would need to continue their journey on foot. Frodo's hope was lifted when Strider produced a single green jewel he had found at the bridge of Mithithil. He took it as a sign that they would be able to pass. They followed a trail of signs left by Gandalf, and then had to leave the road. They were led into a country of woods, and when they left the forest and climbed a steep hill, they were rewarded with a view. They rested at the top, and Strider began to recount tales of the past and of the heroes and kingdoms of old, trying to keep their spirits up. But they were all worried about their next steps and of what lay in wait ahead. As they were speaking, Frodo felt himself growing weary, and a black shadow seemed to be falling over his eyes. His weariness turned to an overwhelming need to rest, and he became concerned. They continued to travel onward, however, until they came to the great river Horwell, where they had to return to the road to cross the last bridge. When they crossed the bridge, they found no sign of their pursuers. They knew the riders would soon be upon them, so they took cover along the side of the road and began to trudge onwards. As they made their way through a valley, their hearts were lifted as they could begin to see the downs, the land that lay before them. But they knew they would also be in grave peril. They stopped for a rest by a deep dell in the hills, where Strider revealed that there were many who could see and smell them, especially at night. He then said that the ring itself drew their enemies, and that they were likely to be found if they rested for too long. He urged them to keep going, but Frodo was too tired to continue, and as they stopped, they were overwhelmed with weariness and were unable to resist a deep sleep, and in that sleep they were all dreaming terrible things. They set off again at dawn, with Strider leading them to the place where the path would lead to Weathertop Hill. As they traveled, Strider told them that they must turn aside and not follow the path, for he did not trust what they would find. They did as he asked, and they took a short cut through the woods that led them to the place of the stone trolls. Their spirits rose slightly as they recalled Bilbo's adventure in the area, and they all had some small laugh over the story. But when they reached the edge of the clearing, Strider turned their course, saying he would try and follow the old road, and they turned east towards the river Bruinen. As the sun began to sink, they all felt fear creep into their hearts, and they began to worry about what was coming next. They set up a small camp and lit a fire, hoping the heat would give them comfort, but it also seemed that they would be calling their enemies to their exact spot. Strider tried to keep up their spirits by telling them a story, a song of Beren and Lúthien, which told of a great love, a terrible loss, and a hope for the future. As he finished the song, they saw the moon rise above Weathertop, and suddenly Sam felt a sense of dread. He knew they were in great peril, and that their enemies were near. They had been hunted from the moment they left the Shire, and now their pursuers were closing in. They sat in silence, when they suddenly became aware of dark figures moving on the slope above them. They were 5 black riders, and they were coming straight for them. As the riders approached, a powerful urge came over Frodo to put on the ring, hoping to escape. However, he was seized by courage and his heart hardened. As the black riders approached, he called out, "O Elbereth, Gilthaniel," and then struck out with his sword. A terrible, deadly cold ran through his left shoulder, and Frodo fell, the world around him fading. He heard the sounds of his friends, of Strider's leap, and a great rushing wind, and then he knew nothing. When Frodo came to, he was by a fire, with his friends bending over him. Strider was gone, and he was left to tell his friends what had happened, and to listen as they recounted the events as they had seen them. They had seen nothing more than black shadows, and a flash of light and sound. When Strider returned, he confirmed that he had seen the black cloaks, and then that he knew the knife that had wounded him. He showed them what was left of the blade, after it vanished into smoke, and then he used a Thelas to tend to Frodo's wound, which eased the pain, but his arm remained lifeless. They knew that they could not stay, so they set off into the morning, leaving the dell behind. They were now making for the ford of Rivendell, and they could sense that their pursuers were not far behind. They had been 7 days since they left Weathertop. They traveled cautiously, and as they did, They came to a place where the road split, and they saw both the river Horwell and the Loud Water, and the road that was to take them over the Bruinen, where danger was waiting. As they approached the ford, Glorfindel urged them on, for he knew that the pursuit was drawing near, and after that, he made them run for the last mile of their journey. As they ran, black riders appeared behind them, and then before them, cutting off their path to safety. Frodo, with fear and hatred rising up in his heart, felt an urge to halt, and so he turned around and faced his pursuers. With a sudden burst of courage, he yelled at them and wielded his broken sword. But the riders responded with a dark laugh and urged their horses forward. Then, with a sudden surge, Glorfindel's horse swept past them, and Frodo was carried forward as the river swelled around him, like a wave that would wash him away. At the very edge of the ford he raised his broken sword one final time, and cried out to them. But the black riders called to him, "The ring! The ring!" And they too came forward. Frodo felt his body grow cold as he lost consciousness, but he caught a glimpse of Strider and white figures with fire as they fought off the darkness. Then he felt himself fall into the blackness of the river, and all went silent and dark. Book 2, Chapter 1, Many Meetings. Frodo awoke in a strange room, sunlight dappling across carved wooden beams. A gentle waterfall trickled nearby. He felt disoriented, as if emerging from a long illness or unsettling dream. "Where am I?" he mumbled to the ceiling. In the house of Elrond, a familiar voice boomed from a nearby window, and it is 10 o'clock in the morning. Gandalf, the old wizard, sat calmly puffing on his pipe. He chided Frodo. "You are lucky to be here after all the absurd things you have done." Frodo, too comfortable to argue, sank back into the bed. Memories flooded in. The shortcut through the old forest, the mishap at the prancing pony, and the terrifying moment on Weathertop when he'd foolishly worn the ring. "Where is Sam?" he asked. "Are the others safe?" "All safe," Gandalf assured. "Sam just left to rest." He explained that Frodo had been fading at the ford when the Black Riders attacked. Gandalf knew more than he let on about Frodo's experiences, admitting, "You have talked long in your sleep. It is no small feat to have come so far, bearing the ring." Frodo admitted that they couldn't have done it without Strider, adding, "We needed you. I did not know what to do without you." Gandalf admitted he had been delayed, but mysteriously added, "It may have been better so." He finally explained he had been held captive, and that war is preparing. He revealed the Black Riders were ringwraiths, servants of the Dark Lord, and they had been saved by Aragorn and Glorfindel, whom Frodo was initially afraid of. Gandalf spoke about Aragorn and his people, the Rangers, hinting at their regal past and their importance in the looming conflict. Frodo, still recovering, realized his journey had taken a toll, and he wished to rest. He realized he'd lost track of time, and was surprised to learn it had been 3 days since he'd arrived. Elrond himself had tended to him, even extracting a piece of the poisoned blade. Gandalf explained the ringwraiths tried to make Frodo a wraith, a twisted servant of the Dark Lord. Gandalf revealed the horses of the riders were from Mordor and were bred to serve the Dark Lord. Gandalf told of the powerful elven lords, saying the power of Mordor can be resisted in Rivendell. He spoke of the mighty elf, Glorfindel, a lord of princes, and how he was seen for a moment as he was on the other side. Gandalf, however, warned that all safe havens like Rivendell will become islands under siege. "But," he said, bristling, "we must keep our courage." He explained how Glorfindel and Aragorn had defeated the Black Riders at the ford using fire and a flood summoned by Elrond. But he said, "The ringwraiths themselves cannot be so easily destroyed." Gandalf admitted that he added to the power of the flood, shaping the waves into great white horses. He added, "You were in gravest peril while you wore the ring, for then you were half in the wraith world yourself." Finally, Frodo closed his eyes. "Soon there will be feasting," Gandalf said, "to celebrate the victory at the ford of Bruinen." Gandalf explained that Frodo was important because he was the ring bearer and heir of Bilbo. Later, Frodo awoke, feeling rejuvenated. He found a change in himself, looking thinner and more like the young nephew of Bilbo, but with a thoughtful gaze. He whistled a tune and heard a knock at the door. Sam rushed in, delighted to see Frodo well. Always a bit more to discover, and no knowing what you'll find round a corner, Sam described of Rivendell. They found the rest of the company in a garden porch. "Hooray! Here is our noble cousin," Pippin proclaimed. Gandalf admonished them, warning that naming the Lord of the Ring could draw evil. The air was warm, and the sound of water was loud, as if summer lingered in Rivendell. They were summoned to a great hall, filled with elves and other guests, where a feast was laid out. Frodo was amazed by the presence of Elrond, Glorfindel, and Gandalf, who were revealed as lords of immense power. Elrond was ageless, a memory of joy and sorrow. Frodo saw a beautiful lady, Arwen, Elrond's daughter, the even star of her people, who was likened to the legendary Luthien. Frodo felt small among such grandeur, but quickly settled in. He noticed a dwarf named Gloin, one of the companions of Thorin Oakenshield, sitting beside him. They spoke of the northern lands, of men who kept the paths safe. Gloin spoke of their homeland, of metalwork and mining, and how they had grown rich. Gloin, a shadow falling across his face, mentioned Balin, and how it was on his account he was at Rivendell. At the end of the feast, they moved to the Hall of Fire, where music filled the air. There, Frodo spotted a familiar figure huddled in the shadows, Bilbo. Bilbo explained he had been sitting and thinking, and had been working on a song. "Fancy that ring of mine causing such a disturbance," Bilbo exclaimed. He asked if he could peek at the ring again, but was quickly met with a strange reaction from Frodo. A shadow seemed to fall between them, and the jovial Bilbo became an unpleasant old creature to Frodo. Bilbo quickly realized and urged Frodo to put the ring away, asking, "Don't adventures ever have an end?" He quickly turned to talk of Shire instead, asking about the small happenings in the land he'd left. A man in green, Strider, appeared. Bilbo was pleased to see his friend, who they learned was sometimes called Dunadan, a man of the West. Bilbo dragged Strider off to polish up his song, and Frodo was left alone to listen to the elven music, the words weaving visions of faraway lands. He fell into a dreamlike state and heard the faint verses of Bilbo's song, the tale of the mariner Erendil. He awoke as Bilbo finished, and learned the green stone was insisted upon by Aragorn. "It seemed to me to fit somehow," Frodo said of the song. Frodo asked if they could talk quietly, and they withdrew, with Sam soon following, worried about his master. They spoke of stars and trees, finding peace in simple beauty. Sam, ever the loyal companion, came in and told Frodo he must sleep as there is to be a council the next day. As they stepped over the threshold, Frodo heard a beautiful song in Elvish. He was entranced, seeing Aragorn standing beside the Lady Arwen. "It is a song to Elbereth," Bilbo explained. Frodo followed Bilbo to his room where they spoke more, but of the fair things of the world, and where, finally, Frodo was able to rest, safe for now, in the heart of Rivendell. Chapter 2, The Council of Elrond. The next morning dawned crisp and clear in Rivendell. Frodo, feeling refreshed, walked along the terraces, the Bruinen roaring below, while Sam, with wide eyes, gazed at the snow-capped mountains. They found Gandalf and Bilbo deep in conversation. "Ready for the great council?" Bilbo asked. A single bell chimed, calling them. Frodo and Bilbo followed Gandalf back to the porch where they'd met the night before. The valley was peaceful, yet the faces they met were grave. Elrond, Glorfindel, Gloin, and even Strider, looking travel-worn, were waiting. Elrond introduced Frodo. Few have ever come hither through greater peril or on an errand more urgent. He introduced others. Gloin's son Gimli, Elrond's counselors, Galdr from the Grey Havens, Legolas, a messenger from Mirkwood, and Boromir, a tall, stern man from the south. The council began, with Elrond detailing the dire events unfolding. Gloin, speaking of the dwarves' troubled hearts, told of whispers of Moria and how Balin had gone with a company and been lost. He then revealed that a messenger from Mordor had come, seeking a little ring, and making promises of riches in return. What shall we do with the ring, the least of rings, the trifle that Sauron fancies? Elrond asked, stating that they had all been brought together, by chance, to find counsel for the peril of the world. He began the tale of the rings of power, starting in the Second Age. He spoke of the elven smiths and how they were ensnared by Sauron, who secretly forged the One Ring in Mount Doom to be their master. He recounted how the land was laid waste, and how the gate of Moria was shut. Then, through the years, he spoke of Numenor, its glory and its fall, of the kings of men's return to Middle-earth. He spoke of the alliance of elves and men, and how the great battle at the Black Gate of Mordor had led to Sauron's defeat, how the sword Narsil broke beneath Elendil, and how Isildur cut the ring from Sauron's hand. Boromir interrupted. So that is what became of the ring. Elrond lamented that Isildur did not cast the ring into the fires of Orodruin. He spoke of Isildur's death and how his bane became a lost tale to the south, but known to the north. Elrond recounted how the victory of the last alliance was fruitless. Sauron was diminished, but not destroyed. Numenor decayed and the line of Menedil failed. Then came a time when evil took Minas Ithil, and it became Minas Morgul, a place of dread. Then Minas Aena was renamed Minas Tirith. Now that part of the tale that I shall tell is drawn to its close. For in the days of Isildur the ruling ring passed out of all knowledge. Elrond finished. He revealed that the One Ring had now been found, and that its finding played small part in his tale. Boromir stood, wanting to speak more of Gondor. He spoke of his people, their valor, and the constant fight against the east and against the terror of Morgul, which keeps the lands behind it safe. He told that they were hard beset. Boromir described a dream that had come to his brother, a dream of a sword broken and of Isildur's bane waking. He spoke of his long journey seeking counsel from Elrond. Aragorn rose and laid his sword, broken in 2 pieces, on the table. "Here's the sword that was broken," he said. "And who are you?" asked Boromir. Elrond declared him Aragorn, son of Arathorn, descendant of Isildur. Frodo was shocked. "Then it belongs to you and not to me at all." Aragorn replied, "It does not belong to either of us, but it has been ordained that you should hold it for a while." Gandalf urged Frodo to show the ring. Frodo felt reluctance and loathing, but held up the golden band. Elrond declared, "Behold Isildur's bane." Boromir, recognizing the ring, asked how the doom of Minas Tirith had come to be a halfling. Aragorn stated, "The sword that was broken is the sword of Elendil. It should be made again when the ring, Isildur's bane, was found." Bilbo interrupted with a verse, speaking of ashes from which a fire will awaken, of renewed blades and a crownless king, for Aragorn. Aragorn, despite Boromir's doubt, spoke of the long lineage of the Dúnedain and how they were the hunters of the enemy's servants. "Peace and freedom, do you say? The North would have known them little but for us." He finished with, "Isildur's bane is found. Battle is at hand. The sword shall be reforged. I will come to Minas Tirith." Boromir was baffled that Isildur was of the past, asking how the wise knew this ring is his. Bilbo, impatient, asked for some refreshment and said that he would tell the true tale of his adventure with Gollum, even if he had claimed the treasure as his own in the past. He recounted his encounter with Gollum, riddles and all. Frodo then less willingly spoke of his own journey, from Hobbiton to Rivendell. Galdr asked for proof of the ring's nature and inquired about Saruman's absence. Elrond turned to Gandalf for answers. Gandalf acknowledged that the enemy's desire for the ring was proof enough of its value. He spoke of his visit to Dol Guldur, revealing the necromancer was none other than Sauron. He detailed how the council put forth its strength, driving evil from Mirkwood, but was too late, as Sauron had long been preparing. He explained Saruman's misleading words, saying the One would never again be found in Middle-earth. Gandalf, admitting his fault, said he should have sought the truth sooner. He revealed his suspicions about the ring and his desire to know how Gollum had acquired it. He mentioned his long and hopeless search with Aragorn. Gandalf explained his plan to test the ring, remembering words of Saruman about the marks on the wand. He traveled to Gondor, where in the hordes of the Nether he found a scroll of Isildur's describing the ring, written in a foul tongue. He shared what he learned, how Sauron's words were known by Celebrimbor, maker of the three. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all and in the darkness bind them. Gandalf then recounted his meeting with Aragorn, and how Aragorn found Gollum near the Dead Marshes. Aragorn described the torment of his travels to find and catch Gollum, and how he gave him to the elves of Mirkwood. Gandalf shared what he learned from Gollum, that the ring came from the great river near the Gladden Fields, and that he had possessed it for a long time. Gandalf then set the ring in the fire, and revealed the writing of Mordor, speaking the foul words. The hall went dark, and the elves covered their ears. Gandalf then told that the one was a treasure of the enemy that held his malice and power. He said that Gollum had been to Mordor, where all that he knew was forced from him. Thus, the enemy knew the one was found, that it was in the Shire, and that it was with them. Boromir asked of Gollum's fate. Aragorn explained he was imprisoned by the elves, adding that he was glad the tormented creature was safely kept. Legolas, however, declared Smeagol has escaped. He told that the orcs had attacked, and Gollum was gone. Gandalf said that they had no time to seek him again, but that he may play a part yet that neither he nor Sauron have foreseen. He then began to tell of the counsel of Saruman. He described how he had gone to see Saruman in Isengard. He found Radagast and spoke with him of the news of the Nine, and of how they were looking for news of the Shire. Radagast, directed by Saruman, sent Gandalf to Isengard for aid. He told of his ride, and how at the gate of Isengard he was met by Saruman. Gandalf described Saruman's words as he offered him a choice, that the time of the elves was over, and the time of men was coming, who were to be ruled by the wise. Saruman offered Gandalf to join him in his rule, but Gandalf refused. Then Saruman revealed that he was after the One Ring, that his lust for it had grown, and that he intended to use it to gain power. Gandalf called him a traitor, and then Saruman trapped him on top of Orthanc. Gandalf told of his imprisonment and his hope that Frodo had reached Rivendell. He described how he was saved by Gwaihir, the Wind Lord, and carried to the land of Rohan. He then told of how he took Shadowfax, a horse from Rohan, and rode swiftly to the Shire. He told of his ride, and of how he got the news from the hobbit Barliman. Then he described how he rushed to Weathertop, where he was besieged by the riders. He escaped and sought to draw them away from Frodo. Gandalf then described his journey to Rivendell. He finished, stating that the tale was told. Here we all are, and here is the ring, but we have not yet come any nearer to our purpose. What shall we do with it? A silence fell. Elrond spoke again, stating that the news of Saruman was grievous. He added, "It is perilous to study too deeply the arts of the enemy, for good or for ill." He found Frodo's tale strange, saying the world had changed much. He said he had forgotten Bombadil. He mentioned that Tom might be an ally, but that he might not be concerned. Gandalf said that Bombadil could not wield the ring, nor could he be a guardian. Glorfindel stated that to give the ring to Bombadil would postpone the day of evil. Galdr asked if they had the strength to withstand Sauron, which Elrond said they did not. Glorfindel stated that the only two things left were to send the ring over the sea or destroy it. Elrond said that those beyond the sea would not receive it. Gandalf said that the sea was not safe forever, and that they needed a final end of the menace. Galdr said that Sauron would expect them to take the western way. Arista declared that the two courses then were to hide the ring forever, or to unmake it. Elrond declared that they must take a hard road, a road unseen into peril, into Mordor to the fires. Frodo felt a dead darkness in his heart. Boromir spoke again, saying that they should use the ring, wielding it for victory. Elrond denied him, stating that the ring was evil and that it would corrupt its wielder. Gandalf added his agreement. Boromir then said that at least while they guard the ring, they would fight on. Gloin spoke of the Lost Seven and the Three, and asked if the elven lords would not say. The elves remained silent. Elrond stated that the three were not made by Sauron. He said they were not made for power or conquest, but to preserve things. He stated they would reveal their wielders to Sauron if he regained the one. Elrond asked, what would happen if the one were destroyed? He said that the three might become free, but that perhaps they would fail. Glorfindel said the elves were willing to endure it if it meant the power of Sauron was destroyed. Arista asked how they would find the fire where the ring was made. Gandalf said that it was wisdom to recognize necessity, though it might look like folly. Then Bilbo spoke, saying that he should finish this affair, but he was met with respect from all but Boromir. Gandalf explained that he was not the one to finish it, but he did need to finish his book. He did, though, question who would be sent. No one answered. The noon bell rang. Frodo, his heart full of dread, spoke quietly. I will take the ring, he said, though I do not know the way. Elrond looked at him, and declared this task was appointed for Frodo. This is the hour of the Shire folk, he said, but it is a heavy burden. I do not lay it on you, but if you take it freely, I will say that your choice is right. Sam, unable to hold back, cried, But you won't send him off alone, surely, master? Elrond smiled. You at least shall go with him. It is hardly possible to separate you from him, even when he is summoned to a secret council and you are not. Sam sat back, saying, A nice pickle we have landed ourselves in, Mr. Frodo. Chapter 3 The Ring Goes South. Later that day, the hobbits gathered in Bilbo's room, buzzing with indignation. Merry and Pippin were upset that Sam, for his audacity, had been chosen for the quest. Frodo, however, saw it as a severe punishment. Yesterday I dreamed that my task was done, and I could rest here, he sighed. Merry countered that it was worse to be left behind. Pippin agreed. We hobbits ought to stick together, and we will. Just then, Gandalf popped his head in, teasing that intelligence wouldn't get Pippin chosen. Bilbo noted that even Gandalf had seemed surprised by Legolas' news of Gollum, but Gandalf dismissed this, saying he had heard it already from Gwaihir. Gandalf added that Frodo and Bilbo were the only real eye-openers, as Bilbo had called it. He did say that nothing was decided beyond choosing poor Frodo and Sam. Bilbo said they should wait for the reports to come in before they did anything. Gandalf revealed that scouts were already being sent out, including elves and rangers, and that Aragorn had gone with Elrond's sons. He said that the whole area needed to be scoured, and that they should wait there a while. Sam then lamented about winter coming. Bilbo pointed out that it was Frodo's fault for delaying their departure. Gandalf said they couldn't leave until they found out about the riders. Merry questioned if they were all destroyed in the flood, which Gandalf corrected by saying, You cannot destroy ringwraiths like that. He stated that they must find out for certain. Then, much to Frodo's surprise, he told Frodo, I think I shall come with you. Frodo asked Bilbo how long they would have there, and Bilbo said that they could have many a good talk, and that they should get started on the next book. Frodo said that he had several endings in mind, but that they were all dark and unpleasant. As the days passed in Rivendell, fear subsided, and they found joy in the present moment, with each good day as it came. Autumn faded into winter. The hunter's moon waxed and waned, and a red star glowed brightly in the south. 2 months passed, and the scouts returned. They had found no trace of the ringwraiths. 3 horses had been found dead in the ford. From these signs, Gandalf said, I think that we may hope now that the ringwraiths were scattered and have been obliged to return to their master in Mordor, empty and shapeless. Elrond summoned the hobbits. He told Frodo that his time had come, and that the task could not be aided by war. Elrond asked, Do you still hold to your word, Frodo, that you will be the ring-bearer? Frodo answered, I do. I will go with Sam. Elrond admitted he could foresee little of their road, but added, You will meet many foes, some open and some disguised, and you may find friends upon your way when you least look for it. He told that he would send out messages, but their journey would be perilous. He announced the company would be 9 strong, and chose their members. Gandalf would go, as this would be his great task. For the elves, it would be Legolas. For the dwarves, it would be Gimli, son of Gloin. For the men, there was Aragorn and Boromir. Frodo was delighted that Strider would join them. "I would have begged you to come," Frodo said. Elrond said he would choose 2 more. Then Pippin was distraught, declaring that they wanted to go with Frodo. Elrond stated he thought it was dangerous for them to go, and that he had thought to send them home as messengers. Pippin declared that he would follow the company no matter what, which Elrond conceded. Now the tale of 9 is filled. "In 7 days the company must depart," said Elrond. The sword of Elendil, reforged by the elves, was renamed Andúril, the Flame of the West. Aragorn and Gandalf pondered maps and lore, sometimes joined by Frodo, but mostly he spent time with Bilbo. They sat in the Hall of Fire hearing tales, but in the day Frodo and Sam joined Bilbo as he worked on his book. On the last morning, Bilbo gave Frodo Sting his small sword and his mithril coat of mail. "I have a fancy would turn even the knives of the Black Riders," Bilbo confided. Bilbo made Frodo promise to care for himself and bring back the news. Then Bilbo sang of old and coming times, before turning to look out the window, humming to himself. The day of departure dawned cold and gray. The company would leave at dusk, under cover of darkness. They were told to fear the many eyes of the servants of Sauron. They took little war gear. Their hope was in secrecy, not in battle. Aragorn had Andúril, but wore his ranger's garb. Boromir had a long sword, shield, and his war horn, declaring that all the foes of Gondor should flee when they hear it. Gimli had a short shirt of steel and a broad axe, while Legolas had a bow, quiver, and a long white knife. The younger hobbits wore their barrow swords, while Frodo had Sting and his mail coat hidden. Gandalf had his staff in Glamdring, the mate to Orcrist. They were well furnished with warm clothes, and supplies were put on the pony they had brought from Bree, whom Sam had insisted go with them, saying he would pine without them. They all bid their farewells. Sam went through all the things that he had stowed in his pack, and realized that he had forgotten rope. Elrond then gave his last words, stating that the only charge was on the ring-bearer, and that others were free companions. "You may tarry or come back, or turn aside into other paths, for you do not yet know the strength of your hearts." Gimli then added his thoughts about faithfulness and paths. Elrond then spoke of those who may vow to walk in the dark when they have not seen the night. Bilbo said his goodbyes, expecting a full account when they returned. The company crossed the bridge and left Rivendell, leaving behind the warmth and the light. They crossed the bridge and wound up the steep paths out of Rivendell. They turned southward by narrow paths, hoping to escape notice. The first part of the journey was cold and dreary, and they felt the wind ever at their back. They slept during the day in any hollow or under the tangled thorn bushes. At night they marched again. The land was rougher, and the paths few and winding. After 2 weeks, the weather changed. The wind veered south, and the sun came out, pale but bright. They saw mountains to the south, with 3 peaks, the tallest like a tooth capped with snow. Gandalf explained that they had reached Holland, where elves had lived long ago. He said the weather would now be milder, but more dangerous. Frodo rejoiced in the sunrise. Gimli, knowing the peaks, said that under them lay Khazad-dûm, the Dworodelf. Gandalf confirmed they were headed for the Dimrill Dale. "May you have joy of the sight, my good dwarf." Gandalf said they could not stay in the valley. They would travel down the Silverlode to the great river. Then Gandalf paused, adding that they could not look too far ahead. Legolas said that the trees and the grass did not remember the elves that dwelt there. Only the stones lamented their departure. The company stopped for the day, but that night Aragorn sensed something amiss. "There is no sound for miles about us, and your voices seem to make the ground echo. I do not understand it." Gandalf then cautioned them, saying that Aragorn was wise to be listened to. While Sam was on the first watch, a dark shape appeared in the sky, and then birds began circling, as if searching for something. Aragorn pulled Sam down, declaring the birds were Creebane from Fangorn and Dunland. He explained that they were spying out the land, and that they would have to move again that evening. That night, they traveled through the ruins of what once seemed to be a road, with work stones tumbled in the barren land. Then Frodo sensed something pass overhead in the sky, a feeling also shared by Gandalf and Aragorn, which led Aragorn to state, it was moving fast and not with the wind. They journeyed for 2 more nights, climbing steadily, until Caradhras rose before them, blood red. Gandalf remarked that winter was deepening, and that snow was lying down low on the mountain's shoulders. He also expressed concern over being seen on the path to the Redhorn Gate. He then saw Aragorn's opinion, and they debated between the weather and another secret path. Frodo heard the debate and learned of the secret way, which seemed to fill Aragorn with dismay. They returned to the company, and Gandalf told them they would face the high pass, and must move quickly. They were all to bring faggots of wood, for a choice between fire and death. The company set out, but the path became steep and treacherous, under heavy cloud cover and a bitter wind. Snow began to fall. Sam complained, and Gandalf and Aragorn acknowledged they knew the risk of snow. Boromir said that perhaps the storm was a contrivance of the enemy, whose arm has grown long. The company pushed on, and soon a blinding blizzard engulfed them. They heard cries, howls of laughter, and stones falling. Boromir stated that they must stop where they were, because the voices on the air were those of an enemy. Gandalf agreed, stating that many things in the world did not love those who go on 2 legs. Gimli added that Caradhras was called Cruel Long before they heard of Sauron. The company gathered under a rocky outcrop, hoping to be safe from the wind and falling stones. A great sleepiness overcame Frodo, until Boromir shook him, pulling him from the snow, and stated that this will be the death of the halflings, Gandalf. It is useless to sit here until the snow goes over our heads. Gandalf pulled out the Maruver, a cordial that Elrond gave him. It revived their spirits, but the snow didn't stop. Boromir stated they should try to make a fire, and Gandalf agreed, stating, if there are any to see, then I at least am revealed to them. I have written Gandalf is here in signs that all can read from Rivendell to the mouths of Anduin. With those words, Gandalf produced a great flame from the end of his staff, and they warmed their hands while the snow swirled about them. But the wood was burning fast. They were left in the darkness until the snow slowly started to slacken. The night was gone, and the day was coming. Gimli, looking at the snow-clad slopes around them, said, Caradhras has not forgiven us. They agreed that they should head back down. They had to cut a path through the snow, as it was higher than their heads. Legolas declared that an elf was better on snow than strong men were. He sped ahead, and came back with news of an open path through a snowdrift. Boromir carried Pippin, and Aragorn carried Merry, while they went through the track to the other side of the snowdrift. Then Sam, then Gimli, then Bill, and finally Frodo were helped through. They were hardly through the pass when a fall of stones blocked the path behind them. Gimli exclaimed, We are departing as quickly as we may. They started down the other side of the mountains, seeing the lower land stretch below them. Frodo rubbed his eyes and saw black specks circling in the air. Aragorn identified them as birds again. Gandalf said, Not even on the knees of Caradhras will we wait for another nightfall. And so, with the cold wind at their back and the black specks in the air ahead, they stumbled down the slope, Caradhras having defeated them. Chapter 4: A Journey in the Dark. Weary, the company halted for the night. Gandalf shared the last of the Maruver. Then they held a council. We have no choice but to go on, or to return to Rivendell, Gandalf said. Frodo stated he did not want to return with shame, unless it was truly the only option. Gandalf then stated they could go neither over or around the mountains, but under them, through the mines of Moria. The name sent a chill through them. Boromir questioned the need, saying they should instead go south and cross into Gondor. Gandalf stated the route was closed to them, due to the treachery of Saruman, and that they could not afford the time to journey so far. Gandalf added that their current plight was worse, and that they needed to vanish and cover their trail quickly. Boromir argued that going into Moria would be akin to walking into a trap. Gandalf, however, said he would not lead them into Moria without hope of returning. He spoke of the orcs that had been destroyed and of a chance that dwarves might still be there. Gimli declared he would follow Gandalf to look upon the halls of Durin. Aragorn agreed to go, though he stated the memory of his last visit was evil. Gandalf asked who else would follow. Pippin, Sam, and Legolas admitted they did not want to go, but Frodo said that he did not wish to refuse the advice of Gandalf. Then Aragorn leapt up, stating the wind was howling with wolf voices, saying that wargs had come west of the mountains. Gandalf declared the hunt was up. They decided to start early the next morning. They climbed a hill crowned with twisted trees and lit a fire for the night. They were surrounded by wolves. Then they saw a great wolf, and Aragorn slew him with a thrust, and Boromir beheaded another, while Legolas' bow sang true. Then Gandalf grew, menacing and great, and tossed a flaming brand into the air that set the trees ablaze. The wolves all fled. In the morning there was no sign of the dead wolves. Gandalf declared that they were no ordinary wolves. He said that the weather had cleared to allow for things to be seen more clearly, and that they must reach the doors before sunset. Gimli led them towards Moria. The road had once run beside a stream, but Gandalf could not find it. They walked through a barren land. Suddenly, Gimli found a broken road that led into a dry channel. They traveled along this path, finding the stair falls, and they saw a large, still, dark lake. None of the company, I guess, will wish to swim this gloomy water at the end of the day, said Gandalf. They made their way around the lake's edge, seeing holly trees, standing like sentinels, that marked the end of the elven domain. Gandalf stated that the west door had been made for the elves' use in their trade with the dwarves of Moria. Gimli noted that it was not the fault of the dwarves that the friendship waned, a statement that Legolas disagreed with. Gandalf told the hobbits that they must say farewell to Bill. The road under the mountains is a dark road, and there are places narrow and steep which he cannot tread, he explained. Sam was upset, but Gandalf reassured him. He will have quite as much chance of escaping wolves and getting home as we have. Sam cried, and then unburdened the pony, and they divided the supplies among themselves. Gandalf appeared to have done nothing but gaze at the wall, while Gimli tapped at the stone with his axe, and Legolas pressed against the stone, listening. Merry asked where the doors were. Gimli said dwarf doors were not made to be seen, and that even the dwarves could not find them if their secret was forgotten. Gandalf stated this door was not only meant for dwarves, that those with knowledge could find the signs. He touched the stone and revealed faint silver lines, which were the symbols of Durin and the Star of Fëanor. Gandalf said they were made of a Thilden that mirrored only starlight, and that it had been long since he had heard the words to open them. Frodo read the inscriptions to be, "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter." Below it said, "I, Narvi, made them." Gimli said they were probably governed by a password. Gandalf admitted he didn't know it. Boromir was angry that Gandalf did not know how to enter. Gandalf explained he had not come in from that direction, and that those doors open outwards with a spell of command. Pippin asked what Gandalf would do, to which Gandalf responded sarcastically, "Knock on the doors with your head." Peregrine took. Gandalf tried many spells, but nothing happened. Then Boromir threw a stone into the lake. A ripple and a bubble came from the dark water, and large rings appeared on the surface, which moved towards a cliff. Frodo, frightened, said, "I am afraid of the pool. Don't disturb it." Then, suddenly, Gandalf exclaimed that he had it and laughed, saying it was too simple to have been seen. He stood before the rock and said Melon, the elvish word for friend. The doors then opened. A shadowy stair could be seen, and a black darkness stretched before them. As they tried to enter, Frodo was grabbed by an arm that came from the waters. Bill fled. Sam tried to save Frodo, and all the others began to flee into the gate, with Gandalf just behind. The doors were slammed shut with a loud crash, and light was lost. Sam cried out for Bill, stating he had to choose to follow Frodo. Gandalf then said that passage was blocked behind them, and they must go forward on the other side of the mountains. He added, "I fear from the sounds that boulders have been piled up and the trees uprooted and thrown across the gate." He added that he was sorry for the loss of the trees, which were beautiful and had stood there for so long. Frodo was troubled by the things he had felt touch him, while Boromir muttered about going into the depths of the world. Gandalf said, "I will, and Gimli shall walk with me." Then Gandalf led them up a great stair and onto an arched passage. They sat and ate and took more moreover. Gandalf warned them that the streams and wells in Moria should not be touched, and that they would likely not be able to refill the water-skins until they were through the mines and in Dimril Dale, stating they had a 40-mile journey ahead. They began their journey, with Gandalf in front, with Gimli, Frodo, and Sam just behind. They went down for a long time before the path evened out. The air was hot and stifling. There were glimpses of stairs, arches, passages, and tunnels branching off in all directions. Gandalf often consulted Gimli, but always made the final decision. Gandalf still knew the way, though it was a far-off memory. Aragorn told them not to be afraid, as they had been in darkness with Gandalf on many an occasion. He said, "He will not go astray. He is surer of finding the way home in a blind night than the cats of Queen Beruthiel." The path contained pits, holes, chasms, and cracks that echoed with unseen water. They went on with no light. Their march grew slower. Sam wished he had rope. Frodo's senses had grown sharper due to his brush with death, as well as the power of the ring. He began to hear, or imagined he heard, the soft fall of bare feet, a footfall that continued when they stopped, and only fell silent once they had been at a stop for a while. Gandalf halted at an archway leading to 3 paths, stating that he was too tired to make a decision and that they should halt for what was left of the night. To the left they found an old guardroom with a broken well in the floor. Pippin threw a stone down the well, and then they heard the sound of distant hammer blows. Gandalf told Pippin to be quiet and made him take the first watch. Gandalf sat and watched through the night and then woke them, stating they must take the right-hand path because he didn't like the smell of the left and didn't like the feel of the middle way. They marched for 8 hours, seeing only the light of Gandalf's staff. Suddenly, the walls vanished, and they were in a vast hall with a great roof. Gandalf said they had reached the habitable parts, and that they were high up on the eastern side. They spent the night huddled together in a corner of the great hall. Sam wondered why the dwarves had built such a vast, dark place. Gimli said the halls had once been full of light and splendor, and then he sang a song of Durin in the dark. Gandalf then spoke of the mithril in the mines, and how it was both their wealth and their destruction. He added that Bilbo had a mithril shirt from Thorin. Gimli said it was a kingly gift. Frodo felt his own mail, and realized the worth of what he was carrying. He wanted to be back in the Shire. Frodo then fell into a troubled sleep, wherein he saw 2 pale lights approaching. He woke to find that others were speaking softly, and that light was shining through a shaft in the hall. Gandalf declared it was morning. He said he was certain they were above and north of the gates, and that they should look at a light coming from a northern arch. They found a stone door ajar in the side of the wall, and discovered a square chamber. In it was a large stone table. The light came from above through a long shaft. On the table they found the inscription, "Balin, son of Fundin, Lord of Moria." Frodo stated, "He is dead then." Gimli covered his face. Chapter 5, The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. The company of the Ring stood silent beside Balin's tomb, remembering Bilbo's friendship with the dwarf. It seemed a lifetime ago, and in another world. They then began to search for news of his fate. They saw many bones and broken weapons. Gandalf, carefully lifting a damaged book from beside a broken chest, revealed that it was the record of Balin's folk. Reading from the damaged pages, Gandalf related the tale of how Balin's company had entered Moria and taken the 21st Hall, set up a seat in the chamber of Mizarbul, and found true silver or mithril. He told that the dwarves had traveled west toward the Holland Gate. Then he stated that many pages were missing. Then, reading from the hand of Ori, Gandalf told that Balin, Lord of Moria, fell in Dimrill Dale. Then an orc shot him from behind a stone, and they slew the orc, but many more were coming from up the Silverlode. Gandalf stated he could read that they had barred the gates, and then he could barely make anything out other than the words horrible and suffer. Finally, reading the last page, he said, "We cannot get out. The Watcher in the water took Oin. We cannot get out. The end comes," and then drums in the deep. The final word stated, "They are coming." A sudden dread fell upon the company. Gimli muttered, "We cannot get out." Gandalf said it was fortunate the waters had sunk a little, and that the Watcher was asleep. They then took the book and prepared to leave the chamber. They would have to say farewell to Balin. They were no closer to their destination. Gandalf then spoke of where they were and that he would lead them back to the hall, and then down towards the east on the 7th level. As he finished, a rolling boom shook the stone beneath their feet, and then a horn sounded and many feet hurried along the passage. Legolas cried, "They are coming!" And Gimli said, "We cannot get out." Then Gandalf stated, "Here we are, caught just as they were before." Aragorn shouted to shut the doors and wedge them and to keep their packs, as they might find a way out. Gandalf said, however, "We must not get shut in," and told them to keep the east door open. He then stepped in front of the western door and cried out for those that disturbed Balin's rest. A voice answered with laughter and a deep commanding voice. Doom, boom, doom went the drums in the deep. Gandalf thrust his staff into the passage, and a bright flash lit the chamber. He quickly stated there were many orcs, black Uruks of Mordor, and cave trolls. He said that there was no hope of escape that way. Boromir stated they would also be trapped if they came at the other door as well. Aragorn declared they would not fly blind, and that they must make the orcs fear the chamber of Mizarble. They then heard the sound of heavy feet, and Boromir slammed the western door shut, and wedged it with pieces of wood and broken sword blades. They retreated and heard a huge arm with dark green scales thrust through the widening gap in the door, and a large foot was forced through. Boromir hewed at the arm, but his sword rang aside. Then Frodo stabbed the foot, crying the Shire, as black drops dripped from his blade and smoked. Boromir slammed the door shut again. Then the door burst open, and orcs rushed into the chamber. Legolas shot 2 orcs. While Gimli hewed the legs from another, Boromir and Aragorn slew many more. The orcs fled, and Gandalf cried that they must leave. An orc chieftain, nearly man-high, then leapt into the room and thrust straight at Frodo, pinning him to the wall. Sam then broke the spear shaft, and Aragorn killed the chieftain, his sword and durel, bursting the orc's helmet apart. The rest fled. Gandalf shouted that now was the last chance. Aragorn picked up Frodo, and the company fled down the stairs. Gandalf paused, and then came running down as the walls trembled. Then the staff met the doors, and there was a rumble, and then a heavy thud. Well, well, that's over," he stated. They followed Gandalf in the dark, as he was rather shaken from that encounter. Gimli asked about the doors. Gandalf said that there was something he had not met before, and that he was almost broken by it. Then, after a moment, he asked after Frodo. Aragorn stated the hobbits were tough. They went on, Gimli declaring that there was a red light ahead. As they passed under an archway, they found themselves in a large hall, split by a great chasm with flames burning below. Gandalf said they were now in the second hall of Old Moria. "Now for the last race," said Gandalf, stating that if the sun was shining outside, they would escape. They ran. They heard the sounds of pursuit, and an arrow whistled over Frodo's head. Legolas then cried out in fear, as a Balrog appeared from the shadows. Gimli cried, "Durance Bane," and covered his face. Gandalf muttered, "Now I understand," and then commanded the others to flee, as this was a foe beyond any of them. Aragorn and Boromir would not leave Gandalf, and stood by him as the Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf declared himself a servant of the secret fire, and that the Balrog could not pass. With a bound, the Balrog leaped on the bridge, and Gandalf lifted his staff and smote the bridge, the staff breaking. The stone where the Balrog stood fell into the abyss, and Gandalf, dragged by the whip, fell in with it, crying, "Fly, you fools!" The fires went out, and darkness fell. They followed Aragorn as he led them up a stair and out onto a wide, echoing passage. They fled and finally saw the daylight from shafts in the roof. They passed through a hall and out to the broken doors, into the world, under the sky. They stood in Dimril Dale and looked back at the black gates, and then they wept. The drum beats faded. Chapter 6, Lothlorien. Aragorn, with sword held high, cried farewell, Gandalf. The company, grief-stricken, gathered their resolve, knowing they must continue on their path. They left Moria behind, looking up at the mountains and the Dimril stair. They saw the Mirror, and Gimli stated that he remembered Gandalf had said, "May you have joy of the sight, but we cannot linger there." As they journeyed down from the mountains, they saw the ruins of old stone works that marked the ancient road to Moria. Gimli, drawn to it, took Frodo and Sam to the Mirror, so they may glimpse the beauty. They saw the mountains reflected in the dark blue water, and the peaks were like flames. Gimli declared, "There lies the crown of Durin till he wakes," and he bowed and turned away. They continued on, eventually coming to a deep well of clear water, where the Silverlow began. They were advised to not drink of it, as it was icy cold. Aragorn said they must travel beside it, as Gandalf had planned. Legolas then spoke of Lothlorien, saying it was the fairest dwelling of his people, where trees grew with golden leaves and silver trunks. Though Frodo and Sam were revived, Aragorn led them at a great pace, eventually pulling far ahead. Aragorn, realizing their weariness, ran back to them. He stated that he had forgotten their injuries and, with Boromir's help, helped them along. They found a dell with fir trees and a stream, and there they rested. Aragorn tended to Sam's wound and declared that it was not poisoned and that the leaves of Athelas would heal it. Frodo tried to refuse treatment, but Aragorn removed Frodo's tunic and gasped. The silver mithril coat glimmered like light on a rippling sea. Merry remarked that he loved Bilbo even more, now knowing of this gift. Aragorn then tended to Frodo's wounds and bound them with a cloth. He said, "Do not lay it aside, even in sleep, unless fortune brings you where you are safe for a while, and that will seldom chance while your quest lasts." They ate a brief meal, and then went on again. The sun was setting, and as they marched, the shadows of night crept around them. They marched for 3 hours, until they reached the border of Lothlorien, hearing the wind through the leaves. Aragorn said they would rest there, as the elves would keep them safe. Gimli then wondered if the elves still dwelt there. Legolas said that Lorien was not yet deserted, for a secret power held evil at bay. Boromir warned them that many went into that land, but few came out unharmed. Aragorn said that it was only evil that would fear it. They walked further into the forest, until they came to the stream Nimrindel. Legolas said they sang of it, and how its waters were healing. He went into the water, and the others followed him. They rested on the other side, and Legolas sang a song of Nimrindel, who was lost long ago. Then Aragorn, advising them, stated they should take refuge in the trees like the Galadrim. Legolas climbed, and then heard a voice commanding Durrow. He dropped back to earth in surprise and fear. Then a voice spoke to him in Elvish. Legolas told the company to be still. Legolas went back up and spoke with the elves, and they decided to help, though they had only heard tell of halflings in many years. Haldir, the leader, said that they would all need to wait at the foot of the tree except for Frodo, Sam, and Legolas, who were to join them on the talon or platform. They were led up, and the elves offered them food, drink, cloaks, and blankets. Pippin was worried about falling from the platform. Legolas said to sleep with them if they wanted, and then he went down to take up his watch with the rest. Sam was soon asleep, and Frodo was kept awake, but finally fell asleep to the sound of Legolas' song. He woke to the sound of laughter and feet on the ground below. A gray elf then cast a ladder upon their talon and whispered YRCH. Before disappearing again, Frodo found it difficult to see the trees as shelter, but felt a fear grow within him. He drew Sting, but its light was fading. He peeked below to find two pale eyes gazing at him, and then something slipped around the trunk. Then Halder told him that they had found something that he had not seen before, and that it had fled once he touched the tree. Halder explained that a company of orcs had passed through the wood and crossed Nimrudel and were pursuing a scent. He said that Orphan had gone to warn the others, and that the orcs would never return from Lothlorien. He said they must leave early the next morning. The next morning dawned, and they walked toward the south with the sun shining. Legolas bade farewell to Nimrudel. When they reached the Silverlode, Halder called for an elf that was across the stream, and made a rope bridge for them to cross. Halder then said they had entered the Nath of Lothlorien, and that Gimli must be blindfolded. Gimli was angry at this, but Aragorn said they would all be blindfolded. Gimli laughed at the idea of such a troop of blind beggars. Halder then said that the power of the Dark Lord had divided those who opposed him, and that they now must live on an island amidst many perils, and they knew not if they would ever have safety. Then all the company were blindfolded and led through the woods. Frodo found his other senses sharpened. He could smell and hear the forest around him, and feel the sun on his face. He was filled with a timeless feeling of being outside the world as he knew it. The next day at noon, the company was allowed to see. They stood in an open space, and before them were circles of trees. There were small yellow flowers and flowers of white and green. Halder told them they had arrived at Seren Amroth, and it was the heart of the realm. Frodo was in awe of this place. It was as though he had stepped through a window into a vanished world. Sam felt the same, declaring he felt as though he was inside of a song. Halder seemed to take the meaning of both word and thought. Halder led them to the top of the hill, showing them the land of Lothlorien running down to the Anduin and the lands beyond. He told of Dol Guldur and the black cloud that often hung over it. He stated that the light had not yet discovered the secrets of darkness. Frodo turned and saw Aragorn holding a small golden bloom. The years had fallen from Aragorn's face, and he seemed young, clothed in white, and spoke in Elvish to one who Frodo could not see. Arwen van Imelda Nummery, he said, before coming back to his senses. He then declared, "Here is the heart of Elvendom on earth, and here my heart dwells ever." And taking Frodo's hand in his, he left the hill of Seren Amroth. Chapter 7 The Mirror of Galadriel. As dusk deepened, the company continued on and came to a wide, treeless space with a deep fosse. On the other side rose Cars Galadhon, a city of trees ablaze with lights. Halder welcomed them, but led them around to the southern side, past the great gates of the city, set between overlapping walls. They found themselves in a lane, where they heard voices in the air and above, and music coming from high on the hill. They climbed many paths and stairs, and came to a fountain that shimmered in the light of silver lamps. Beside a great Malorn tree, 3 elves waited. Halder told Frodo and Legolas to ascend first, and then the rest of the company, who must climb the long ladder. Frodo arrived at a Talon and met Celeborn and Galadriel, who were tall, grave, and beautiful, and sat beneath a living bough. They greeted the company, and Halder told Galadriel that Gandalf did not pass the borders of their land. "Now tell us where he is, for I much desired to speak with him again," Galadriel said. Aragorn told her that Gandalf fell in Moria, and Legolas revealed it was a Balrog of Morgoth. Celeborn was dismayed that the dwarves had awakened such an evil again. Gimli stated that he had seen Durrance Bane. Galadriel stated, "Needless were none of the deeds of Gandalf in life. Those that followed him knew not his mind, and cannot report his full purpose." She turned to Gimli, saying, "Do not repent of your welcome to the dwarf. I will do what I can to aid you," adding that she saw love and understanding in Gimli's heart. Gimli, hearing the names of his ancient home in his own tongue, declared that Galadriel was above all the jewels that lie beneath the earth. Galadriel looked at Frodo, stating their quest was known to her. She told them that their quest was on a knife's edge, and that she could not counsel them. She looked at them, and for a moment they were all made aware of a great desire, only to have it taken away. Then they felt weary, as if they had been questioned long and deeply. Celeborn spoke then, stating they would have refuge in the city until they were healed. The company slept in a pavilion, and as they talked of their day, they each stated that the lady had offered them a choice between the fear ahead and something they greatly desired. Boromir would not reveal what was offered to him. Frodo would not speak either, he stated. She held you long in her gaze, ring-bearer. Frodo's reply was, yes, but whatever came into my mind then I will keep there. Boromir stated he felt unsure of the lady. Aragorn responded that there was no evil in her unless it was brought there, and that he would sleep without fear. The company fell asleep and slept soundly through the night. The days passed with the sun shining and gentle rain falling. They ate, drank, rested, and walked among the trees, while elvish voices sang laments for Gandalf, who they called Mithrandir. Frodo put something of his sorrow into a song, remembering Gandalf as an old man in a battered hat who leaned on a thorny staff. Sam said he wished he would include fireworks. Frodo said he could not bring himself to speak of it to Bilbo. One evening Frodo and Sam were walking together and spoke of the elves. They spoke of how they belonged here more than hobbits did in the Shire, that nothing seemed to be going on, and no one wanted it to. Frodo said he could see the magic everywhere, while Sam said he could see no one working it. Frodo then said he missed Gandalf's temper and his voice. Sam said he felt he must get the quest done. Then Galadriel appeared and beckoned to them. She led them into an enclosed garden where a mirror was set upon a low pedestal, beside a stream. Here is the mirror of Galadriel, she stated. I have brought you here so that you may look in it if you will. Frodo was filled with awe. Galadriel then stated that she could command the mirror to show many things, and some things that they wished to see, but that the mirror would also show things unbidden. She added, the mirror is dangerous as a guide of deeds. She then asked if they wanted to look. Sam was curious and said he wanted to see what was happening at home. He saw a vision of the Shire. He saw Ted Sandyman cutting down trees, and he saw that the old mill had been replaced. There's some devilry at work in the Shire, he said. Then he saw himself going down a dim passage, and he saw his gaffer going down the hill with his bits of things on a barrow, and he cried out that he had to go home, realizing that he should never have come. I'll go home by the long road with Mr. Frodo, or not at all, he declared. Galadriel then asked Frodo if he wanted to look, saying she was not a counselor, and that seeing is both good and perilous. Frodo agreed to look. The mirror cleared, and he saw a twilight land. Gandalf was walking down a road clothed in white, but with his head bowed, and so he could not see his face. Then Frodo saw Bilbo restless in his room, and then many scenes flashed before him. A vision of the sea, a ship with torn sails, and then a city with 7 towers, then fire in a ship, and then the sun going down, and then a ship passing into the mists. Then the mirror went dark, and a single eye appeared. Frodo was filled with terror as he was drawn to look at it. He knew it was seeking him, and that it would not see him unless he willed it. The ring grew heavy on his chest. Galadriel then stated, I know what it was that you last saw, for that is also in my mind. She stated she perceived the Dark Lord, and that he groped to see her in her thought, but that the door was closed. She held up her hands, and the even stars shone above her and glittered in the ring on her finger. Verily it is in the land of Lorien upon the finger of Galadriel that one of the 3 remains, she stated. She added, This is Nenya, the ring of adamant, and I am its keeper. She stated that Sauron suspects but does not know of her ring, and that if they failed then Lothlorien would be laid bare to the enemy, but that if they succeeded, their power would be diminished, and the land would fade. She finished with, For the fate of Lothlorien you are not answerable, but only for the doing of your own task. Then Galadriel said that she desired the ring, and that she could be fair and terrible as the morning and the night, and that all would love and despair. She lifted her hand, and light emanated from her ring, and she seemed tall and terrible. Then she laughed and returned to a simple elven woman. I passed the test, she stated. Frodo asked why. If he was able to wear the ring, he could not see the other rings and the thoughts of those who wore them. Galadriel told him it would destroy him. She said he would need to be stronger and to train his will, but he also had not tried. He had not seen the ring on her finger. She then asked Sam if he had seen the ring. Sam stated he had seen a star, but then added, "I wish you'd take his ring. You'd put things to rights." "I would," she said. That is how it would begin. But it would not stop with that, alas. "We will not speak more of it. Let us go." Then they returned and went to sleep for the night. They would leave the next morning. They had chosen, and fate was now in motion. Frodo had been shown the mirror, but its implications were unknown. He understood, however, the power and importance of the choices that they were about to make. Chapter 8, Farewell to Lorraine. That evening, the company was again summoned to the chamber of Celeborn and Galadriel, where they were greeted with fair words. Celeborn, then, spoke of their departure and told them that it was time for those to continue their quest to leave, that no one was certain of peace. All of the company, Galadriel stated, had chosen to continue. Boromir said his way home lay forward, and Celeborn acknowledged that but wondered if his company would be going with him. Aragorn admitted they had no clear path, and that not even Gandalf had any plan. Celeborn said that the river could not be crossed save by boat, and they would need to choose on which shore they would travel. Boromir advised the western shore, toward Minas Tirith, but Aragorn looked troubled. Celeborn then offered boats, crafted by his people, and told them they would find the boats waiting at a haven the next day. That night the company spoke of their path, finding that many wanted to go to Minas Tirith and escape the terror of the enemy. Frodo spoke nothing, and Aragorn remained divided. Boromir wanted to defend Gondor, but Frodo was meant to destroy the ring, and how could he help with that? Boromir then questioned if the ring should be destroyed or used, saying, "It would be folly to throw lives away." He then caught himself and said, "It would be folly to throw lives away, I mean." Frodo saw something new and strange in his eyes, and understood that his thoughts had drifted away from what he had said aloud. The night grew late, and Merry, Pippin, and Sam were all asleep. In the morning they found elves bringing gifts of food and clothing for the journey. The food, called lembas, was said to keep them strong. The cloth, woven by Galadriel herself, was made in colors like the forest. They are elvish robes, certainly, if that is what you mean. Leaf and branch, water and stone. They have the hue and beauty of all these things under the twilight of Lorien, they explained. Pippin asked if they were magic cloaks, and was told that they were not, but that they would be helpful in their travels. After breakfast, the company went to say their final goodbyes at the fountain. Halder came to them and said, "Your path now goes south." They entered Cars Galadhon one last time, and then passed through the gates, entering into the woods, their path leading them down to the river. They came to the Silverlode and a height of stones and wood, where several boats were moored. 3 small gray boats had been made for them, and the elves added ropes made of Hithlane, and told Sam that if they knew that the making of rope was a joy to him, that they would have taught him. They took their places in the boats. Sam was at the front, clutching the sides and gazing wistfully at the shore. As they turned a bend, they saw a swan ship coming toward them. The water rippled around the white breast of the boat beneath the curving neck. The ship came closer, and they heard Galadriel singing. The swan ship drew alongside, and the lady greeted them. She invited them to a parting feast on the green grass at the edge of the shore. Frodo only ate and drank a little, heeding Galadriel's voice and beauty. She was no longer terrible. She seemed remote, yet present, like a living vision of something left behind. After their meal, Celeborn spoke, describing the long journey ahead, speaking of Rorros, the falls, the Wetwang, and the Entwash. He cautioned them against Fangorn. He then added that their lore might still be useful. Galadriel then filled a cup and gave it to Celeborn, before giving it to the company, wishing them a fair night and an untroubled sleep. Galadriel spoke, then saying, "We have drunk the cup of parting," and presented the gifts. First she called for Aragorn, and gave him a sheath for his sword, with his name written in runes. saying, "The blade that is drawn from the sheath shall not be stained or broken even in defeat." She then offered him another gift, something that had been in her keeping, a stone of clear green, set in a brooch in the likeness of an eagle. "In this hour take the name that was foretold for you, Elisar, the elf stone of the house of Elendil," she declared. Aragorn was changed by this, and grew in stature before their eyes. Then Galadriel gifted Boromir with a gold belt, and silver belts with clasps in the form of golden flowers were given to Merry and Pippin. She then gave Legolas a bow and quiver of arrows, such as were used in Lorien. To Sam, she gave a small box of earth from her orchard, that if you keep it and see your home again at last, then perhaps it may reward you. Though you should find all barren and laid waste, there will be few gardens in Middle-earth that will bloom like your garden. Sam was at a loss for words. Finally, Galadriel asked what a dwarf would ask for. Gimli stated that he only needed to have seen her and hear her words. She commanded him to choose a gift, and he asked for a strand of her hair. "Yet surely, Gimli, son of Gloin, you desire something that I could give? Name it. I bid you, you shall not be the only guest without a gift." Gimli then asked for a single strand of her hair, to which Galadriel acquiesced. Then Galadriel addressed Frodo, who she said was not the last in her thoughts, and gave him a crystal phial, saying that the light of Erendil's star was set amid the waters of her fountain. "It will shine still brighter when night is about you. May it be a light to you in dark places, when all other lights go out. Remember Galadriel and her mirror." Frodo was unable to speak. Then Celeborn led them back to the hive. The company took to their boats, as the elves thrust them into the river. As they drifted away, they saw Galadriel on the bank, and she lifted her arms in farewell. Then, far but piercing clear, they heard her voice, singing in an ancient tongue of the elves, of things little known in Middle-earth. She sang of the leaves of gold, of wind and sea, and beyond the sun and the moon, and of a golden tree upon a distant shore. It was a lament for all that is past, and for all that was being left behind. Then the river turned, and Lothlorien was hidden behind the banks. The travelers looked forward to their journey, tears filling their eyes. Gimli declared that he had looked his last upon that which was fairest, and he would call nothing fair, unless it was her gift. He said, "But I would not have come, had I known the danger of light and joy." Legolas tried to comfort Gimli, saying that his memory would remain unstained. Gimli stated that memory was not the same as what the heart desired. Then he said that they should look to the boat, as he did not want to drown in the water of the great river. The company floated far down the river, beneath the woods that lined the shores. They drifted on into the quiet, into a cold gray night, until sleep took Frodo. They traveled for hours, with no sound but the river, until they heard something they were all looking to avoid, the roar of the Falls of Rhoros. They knew they had come to the end of their journey on the river. They had passed the borders of Lothlorien. Chapter 9, The Great River. Frodo was roused by Sam, finding himself well wrapped under the trees. Gimli was building a fire. They started again, knowing that they would need to make a decision about their path when they reached the Tindrock Isle. They followed the river, not eager to travel south, but Aragorn urged them to start early and travel far into the evening. They traveled for 2 days without seeing signs of their enemies, but on the 3rd day the lands changed. They saw brown and withered lands on the east, but on the west they saw plains of grass. Frodo felt a sadness at the bleak landscape, having imagined that the further south they traveled, the warmer and merrier the world would grow. Aragorn explained that it was still winter, and that they were far from the sea. He stated that they were in the north plains of the Riddermark, and that the lands once belonged to Rohan, but the people no longer dwelled by the river for fear of orcs. Sam looked around uneasily, wishing for the trees once more. They began to paddle hard, as they began to feel insecurity. They were naked on the water, while those in the land could not be seen. Boromir sat with his eyes fixed on Frodo, as if trying to read his thoughts. Then Pippin caught a strange gleam in his eye. That night, While camped on an eyot, Sam told Frodo that he had seen a log with eyes. Sam then stated he thought that whatever it was Gollum. Frodo admitted he had seen the same eyes long ago. Aragorn admitted he knew Gollum was following, and hoped the river voyage would beat him. Sam then took the first watch. In the dead of the night, Frodo was awakened, and he saw a dark shape grab the side of their boat. He saw 2 pale eyes, and then the creature disappeared. Aragorn then rose, having also felt something in his sleep, and he told that they must go faster the next day and try to lose Gollum. After that, the company paddled hard, and by the 7th day, the weather changed. A thin moon had appeared, and Aragorn told that they must continue onward. Suddenly, they found themselves close to a ridge of sharp rocks. They began to try and turn, when arrows flew over them. They had been found by the orcs and were being swept toward the shore. They paddled with all their might, pushing towards the western bank. Legolas then strung his bow and took a shot, causing a tumult and then silence. Then Gandalf urged them onward. They pulled the boats up into a shallow bay and laid them to rest. Frodo then saw a shape moving in the sky, and Legolas said that it was an eagle, and he wondered what that foreboded. They waited for the night to fall, and then set off again. Aragorn led them, telling them that he knew the river. The night grew dark, and they drifted, hardly moving, and suddenly Sam cried out. They were being carried towards sharp rocks. They turned and paddled hard, and the boat scraped against the stones. Then arrows began to fly. The company pulled hard toward the western bank and managed to escape. Aragorn told them that it was indeed Gollum, and then he added, "Since we took the boats, he has been lying on a log and paddling with hands and feet." Legolas then told them that they had been seen. The company made camp by the side of the river, and there, as the night wore on, a dark shape sped towards them, blotting out all light. Frodo felt a chill and clutched at his heart. Then Legolas shot an arrow, and the shape fell into the gloom of the eastern shore. They all knew that it had been something they could not defeat with bow and arrows alone. The night then passed, and the boats were drawn into a small shallow bay, where the travelers took to sleep. In the morning, they found the river was calm and still. Aragorn said that they must make their decision on which road they must take. Boromir argued for the road to Minas Tirith, while Aragorn spoke of a Monhen. Aragorn and Legolas went on ahead to find a path. When they came back, they told of a way they had found, where they could bring the boats up to the side of the river to avoid the rapids. The company then spent the better part of the day hauling the boats over a rocky portage, before putting them back on the river. The day was growing old, and the wind was growing chill as they continued downstream. The sound of the rapids grew louder, and Frodo saw the great pinnacles of stone rising up from the water's edge. They were the Argonath, the pillars of the kings. He realized that they were indeed shaped and fashioned with craft. He cowered. Then he heard the voice of Aragorn. "Fear not," he cried. "Under their shadow Elisar, the elf-stone son of Arathorn, has naught to dread." Then they plunged into the dark chasm, the great gates. The water roared around them, and a wind screamed overhead. Frodo heard Sam muttering. Then Aragorn said to them, "Long have I desired to look upon the likenesses of Isildur and Anarion, my sires of old." They came out of the chasm to find a long oval lake, Nenhithul, and before them rose 3 peaks, the midmost an island in the water, called the Tindrock. There Aragorn said they would have to make their choice. He stated that he could hear the voice of Rorros. They ate, and then took to their paddles once more. The day was dying, and they came into the shadows of the hills. Rorros was roaring. The 10th day of their journey was over, and the Wildolins were behind them. The last stage of the quest was before them. They stopped in the shadows beside the lake and prepared for the last decision of their voyage. Chapter 10: The Breaking of the Fellowship. Frodo awoke in the early morning with Gimli tending a small fire. They set off, letting the river guide them, but with Aragorn insisting that they start early and journey far into the evening, as he felt that time was growing short. They drifted for 2 days, seeing no sign of the enemy. By the 3rd day, the lands changed. They saw the barren brown lands on one side and rolling downs on the other. Frodo thought of the beauty of Lothlorien. They spoke little and laughed not at all. Each was with their own thoughts. Legolas' heart wandered to summer glades. Gimli yearned for Mithril, and Merry and Pippin grew wary of Boromir. Sam felt uncomfortable and simply watched the banks pass him by. Then he thought he saw a log with eyes following them in the water. That night they camped on an eyot, and Sam told Frodo about the log with eyes. Frodo said that those eyes had been seen many times, and he admitted that it was likely Gollum. They decided to be more watchful. Then Frodo found himself looking at 2 pale eyes, and he realized Gollum was close. They set off again the next morning, and in their 7th night, they finally were out from the mountains. The country had changed, with steep slopes and rock chimneys. Aragorn wondered if news of their voyage was traveling through the wilderness. He saw a great bird flying southwards. That evening, the company was passing jutting rocks and shoals, and they found themselves near the eastern bank when arrows flew at them. They realized that they were being attacked and needed to move swiftly away. They pulled their boats away from the shore and managed to escape into the middle of the stream. Then a black-winged creature raced toward them from the south, and the company was gripped by a deep dread. Legolas shot an arrow and the creature fell from the sky, but the threat of what had attacked was terrible. Gandalf's command was then remembered, "Fly, you fools!" Then Aragorn and the company set off quickly and hid the boats, and took time to rest until morning. The next day, they began to debate, but Aragorn said, "I do not know what design or hope he had for this hour, if indeed he had any." Frodo felt the weight of the burden on his shoulders, and requested a moment to be alone. Boromir came and spoke with him, saying he did not understand why they would throw away the chance to use the ring. Frodo knew this was not his friend, but someone whose heart had become twisted by the ring. Boromir offered Frodo to come with him to Gondor, but Frodo refused him. "It is by our own folly that the enemy will defeat us," cried Boromir, and then his face changed, and he demanded the ring from Frodo, calling him a miserable trickster and a fool. Frodo felt his heart grow cold, and then in a panic he slipped on the ring and disappeared. Boromir, distraught and weeping, then begged Frodo to come back, but to no avail. Frodo found himself suddenly alone on the summit of a mountain, and sat in the ancient chair. He saw visions of the world, but then he felt the gaze of the eye, and he threw off the ring and cried, "Never," before seeing the path that stretched before him. "I will do now what I must," he said aloud, and knowing he could no longer trust all of his company, he resolved to travel to Mordor alone. Meanwhile, the others found Boromir, and he told that Frodo had left him, and that he had vanished using the ring. Sam then stated that Frodo was terrified, and had made up his mind to travel east. Pippin cried that they had to stop him, and Aragorn said that Frodo was the bearer, and it was not their place to stop him. Then Sam realized the truth. He made up his mind at last to go. Where to? Off east. Not without Sam? Yes, without even his Sam. Sam ran back to where the boats were, found one ready, and leapt into the water. Frodo then pulled him from the water, and told him he would have to go on without him. But Sam said that was not possible. Frodo then gave in, and together they decided to travel onward. "It is plain that we were meant to go together," he said. They left the boats and headed eastward towards the Eamon Mule. Frodo and Sam paddled down the western arm of the river and passed under the towering walls of Tolbrander. At last, they reached the southern slopes of Amon Law, where they hid the boat. Aragorn had planned to go to this point before choosing which road to take. The last choice was now before them. The next day, a fire-filled sky gave way to the bright sunlight, shining on the white peak of Tolbrander. As the company ate their morning meal, Aragorn spoke of the choice before them, asking, "Shall we turn west with Boromir and go to the wars of Gondor, or turn east of the Fear and Shadow, or shall we break our fellowship and go this way, and that as each may choose?" After a long silence, Frodo asked for an hour to make up his mind. After wandering in the woods, he came upon Boromir, who attempted to convince him to take the ring, but Frodo said he could not. Boromir's desire for the ring grew, and he demanded it from Frodo. Frodo refused, and Boromir sprang at him, and Frodo put the ring on. Boromir, shocked, raged and screamed, before Frodo vanished once more. Frodo then ran to the top of a Monhen and sat on the ancient seat. The ring on his finger allowed him to see many things, and he knew that he was drawing the eye. Two powers then strove within him. But in the end he was Frodo again, and he took off the ring, and knowing he could not trust everyone he knew, he must travel to Mordor alone. He made his way down the hill to find that the company had broken, and all were looking for him. He heard the calls of the others, and knew that he would have no chance to sneak away undetected. He put the ring on and slipped away, vanishing into the night. The company was frantic and spoke in confusion. Gimli and Legolas were arguing about their path, and Merry and Pippin were distraught at the thought of Frodo going alone. Then Sam stated that they all knew Frodo had to seek the cracks of doom. He was not concerned about whether the company would follow him or not. He knew they would. Then Boromir reappeared, telling that he had spoken with Frodo and had grown angry. He stated he vanished and that he had never seen such a thing. Sam jumped up, knowing Boromir was not to be trusted. Then Aragorn began to organize them to search, but Sam left at once, declaring that he was going to follow Mr. Frodo. Aragorn went after Sam and told him to be cautious. Sam reasoned that Frodo would have to return to the boats. He then ran back to where the boats were and saw them slipping into the water. He cried out to Frodo and leapt into the water, missing the boat. Frodo quickly pulled Sam up out of the water, and then decided he could not journey to Mordor alone and leave Sam behind. "It is plain that we were meant to go together," Frodo said to Sam, and taking one last boat, they departed down the river, past the looming shadow of the Tindrock. They had set off on the last leg of their journey, and so the Fellowship stands at the crossroads of destiny. The bonds of friendship have been tested, and the road ahead lies cloaked in shadow. With the Fellowship scattered, the fate of Middle-earth now rests on the shoulders of a small and determined few. What dangers await Frodo and Sam as they venture into the unknown, guided only by the enigmatic Gollum? Will Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli find a way to honor their oath to protect the Fellowship, even as the forces of darkness close in? The journey has only just begun, and the stakes have never been higher. In Book 2, alliances will be forged, legends will rise, and the battle for Middle-earth will escalate to unimaginable heights. Stay tuned as we dive into the Two Towers, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the unyielding hope that drives our heroes forward. Until then, remember, the road goes ever on. See you in the next chapter of this epic adventure.